U.S. Supreme Court justices. Targeted by such a behemoth, Trump was truly unfazed. This guy, despite his flaws, arrogance, conceit, discrimination, vulgarity, possessed a big heart. Am I afraid of them? The Rockefeller family? My Trump family is just 100 years behind in starting. Not only did he ignore the Rockefeller family's warnings, but he escalated the investigations into domestic oil companies. Any with issues similar to Texas brine were all shut down for rectification. This move indeed won Trump the favor of the southern U.S. rednecks. Martin couldn't help but admire him. This guy was simply a devil-may-care bastard. In the original timeline, it was a miracle he didn't die in the presidency. Is that idiot crazy? Hillary cursed at home about Trump's recent mad actions. Clinton said, quite the opposite. I think he's very smart. He's picking up what we discarded, the rednecks, and the Rockefellers have already shown they won't support him. Trading one enemy for a block of voters is a good deal. Isn't he afraid of ending up like Kennedy? Hillary said gloomily. Clinton replied, times have changed. Assassinating the nation's top leader carries too much risk now. Besides, this guy isn't unprepared. Look, Clinton turned his desk laptop, pointing the screen at Hillary. On the screen was Trump's latest tweet. Unless further notice is received, I will allow the National Archives to release the final batch of classified files related to the assassination of former President John F. Kennedy. What the fuck? Hillary was truly shocked this time. How dare he? Clinton smiled and said, this is just a threat. It may not turn into action. Then he paused, scratching his forehead with his left pinky, and said uncertainly, normally, that would be the case, but Trump might be an abnormal person. On November 22, 1963, Kennedy was shot and killed while riding through Elm Street in Dallas, becoming the fourth assassinated president in U.S. history. The Kennedy assassination was riddled with suspicions. Many pieces of evidence couldn't be verified. The suspect arrested by police, Oswald, was also gunned down, leaving many unanswered mysteries. The year after Kennedy's death, the Federal Special Commission investigating the case released its findings, concluding that Oswald fired from the sixth-floor window of the Texas School Book Depository at the president passing below in an open convertible, killing him. Oswald acted alone, with no larger conspiracy. However, the American public didn't buy this explanation. Many polls showed that most Americans believed the Kennedy assassination involved more suspects than just Oswald, with a conspiracy behind it. Conspiracy theories about Kennedy's death abounded, with suspects including the CIA, U.S. President Johnson, the Soviet KGB, the American Mafia, and more. In fact, those involved in assassinating Kennedy were several major U.S. families. The files Trump wanted to release were the classified documents from that investigation, over 6,000 files spanning tens of thousands of pages, with more than 3,000 never released and another 3,000 in redacted form. So, he's warning the Rockefellers not to make any moves? Hillary was still stunned. Trump's audacity was immense. Clearly so. Clinton shrugged. Back in Los Angeles, Martin saw the news too and couldn't help saying, fuck, this guy's got balls. But this move was indeed clever. Martin suddenly recalled that in an MSNBC interview, Trump had boasted about attending an Ivy League school and being extremely smart. Compared to the real me, the media portrays me as more uncivil. You know, people don't understand me at all. I went to an Ivy League school. I was a very good student, with excellent grades. I'm a very intelligent person. Trump said, you know, I think the truth is, the media creates an image completely different from the real Trump. Martin thought, Trump's right, he is a smart guy. Then, on second thought, he remembered one of Trump's recent statements. Okay, being smart and being cultured might not be the same thing. What statement made Martin think that? Let's take a look. This was Trump's Twitter defense of his intelligence from May 9th of that year. My uncle was a great professor, scientist, and engineer, Dr. John Trump at MIT. Good genes, very good genes, okay? Very smart, the Wharton School of Business, very good, very smart. You know, if you're a conservative, I'm a liberal, okay? If I ran as a Democrat, people would say I'm one of the smartest people in the world. That's right. Sorry, losers and haters, I'm one of the smartest people. Yes, this fragmented, nonsensical sentence was Trump's exact words. No wonder many in U.S. politics secretly called Trump an idiot, like the Clintons. MSNBC reported that they'd never seen an Ivy League graduate talk like that. It felt like Trump was trying to convince himself, not the public, to believe he had a very good brain. Trump might be uncultured, but his intelligence was undeniable, and he was an intelligent man with immense courage. After dragging out the dead President Kennedy, the Rockefellers' actions against him did indeed recede. Some dangerous off-the-books moves were canceled, leaving only routine workplace confrontations. Trump was relatively satisfied with this. So, on October 27th, at the last moment before releasing the Kennedy files, Trump blocked some key documents, releasing only 2,800 redacted files with no explosive information. Time advanced to late November. It wrapped production. North American box office halted at $445 million, while global box office reached $802 million, shattering the horror film record set by Get Out with $414 million North American and $789 million global. Drew held a wrap party, but Martin didn't attend. Trump's last stop on his Asia-Pacific tour was Russia. Before heading to Russia, Trump went to India first. The attitude of India's leaders showed Martin what true bootlicking looked like. In the words of Indian Prime Minister Modi, "For the future of Asia and the benefit of all humanity, we will join hands in cooperation. We will do our utmost to meet the U.S.'s expectations." After touring Asia, Trump returned satisfied. Martin also returned content. In a great mood, Trump even joked on Twitter, taking a swipe at his arch-nemesis CNN. "We should have a contest, including CNN but excluding Fox News, to see which company is the most despicable, corrupt, or politically twisted in describing your favorite president, me." Then he listed a bunch of media outlets on Twitter, saying, "They're all terrible. I suggest awarding the winner a fake news trophy. The good news is their credibility and ratings are terrible. No one pays attention to them." Aquaman's filming went very smoothly and had entered post-production. Lately, Martin had been immersed in the editing room. One day, he received a call from Sophia. "Martin, turn on your computer. Your president father-in-law is at it again with his big mouth." Curious, Martin opened his laptop and went to Trump's Twitter. There were 3 latest videos on Twitter. Martin first checked the video sources. They were retweeted from the Twitter of Jada Franson, deputy leader of the British far-right group Britain First. The videos included Muslim beating a Dutch boy on crutches, Muslim destroying a statue of the Virgin Mary, and a few others. Trump not only posted them but captioned, "For national security." The implication was self-evident. The impact of Trump posting 3 anti-Muslim videos on Twitter quickly fermented. The first to respond was the video's origin country, Britain. British Prime Minister Theresa May, visiting the Middle East, immediately responded to Trump's anti-Muslim videos, stating, "This is wrong behavior. UK-US cooperation should continue, but cooperating with the US doesn't mean we won't point out when America is wrong." Theresa May said this to reporters in Jordan. As Theresa May officially responded, Trump's Twitter was also harshly criticized in the UK Parliament. CNN reported on December 12 that UK MPs used words like racist, fascist, evil to describe Trump. This was unprecedented treatment for a U.S. president in the UK Parliament. Labour MP Stephen Doughty said, "The U.S. president is sharing inflammatory, divisive content with millions." Stephen Doughty also tweeted, "Trump isn't a racist, incompetent, or thoughtless, or maybe all 3. Another Labour MP, Chris Bryant, said, "It's hard to believe this is the action of a nation's top leader. If Trump comes to the UK, this U.S. president will be arrested. Our prime minister should clearly state that if Donald Trump comes to this country, he'll be arrested for inciting religious hatred, so he'd better not come." Conservative MP Peter Bone suggested Trump delete his Twitter account. He thought, "It's not that there's no solution. If the prime minister can convince the U.S. president to delete his Twitter account, wouldn't the world be better? Moreover, it could demonstrate the UK's influence on the world." Home Secretary Amber Rudd immediately responded, "I believe many of us agree with this view." Before the UK Parliament session, London's Muslim mayor Sadiq Khan had already issued a statement criticizing Trump. He said, "Trump is a petty man. He's supporting despicable far-right organizations in our country that create division and hatred. I think Theresa May should first cancel Trump's visit to the UK. Of course, not all voices in the UK Parliament were one-sided criticism. For example, UK Cabinet Minister Justine Greening said in a BBC interview on Thursday morning, "Although I disagree with President Trump's Twitter content, I have to say, I think we shouldn't overinterpret this US president's actions. He's just targeting the video content, not all Muslims. I believe this incident won't diminish the long-standing close relations between the UK and the US and its people. As presidents come and go term after term, in the end, our relationship with the US will endure," Greening added. Trump also responded to his actions, explaining, "My purpose is to emphasize border security and national security issues." Regarding questions about the video's authenticity, he seemed unconcerned, responding, "What difference does it make? Because the threat is real." Martin called Ivanka, "Your father's recent antics stirring up trouble over the Muslim ban seem a bit odd, don't they?" Martin said. Ivanka's reply sounded slightly hesitant. He's just like that. Sometimes he does foolish things." Martin laughed. "This isn't just being foolish. Is he trying to use this issue's heat to cover up something else, like Russiagate?" Ivanka clearly breathed a sigh of relief. "You guessed it. That's great. Then I don't have to hide it anymore." Martin asked curiously, "So it really is Russiagate?" Another development. Ivanka said, "Yes, Michael Flynn pleaded guilty. You know, he was my father's national security advisor. Since last week, Flynn's lawyers stopped communicating with my father's legal team. We suspected then that this guy might have reached a plea deal with Mueller." Ivanka continued, "We received information that Michael Flynn has admitted to lying to FBI investigators in the Russiagate probe. This situation is extremely unfavorable for my father." Martin said, "So your father is using anti-Muslim behavior to divert public attention. I have to say, this idea is rotten. It's like piling another pile of dog shit on top of an existing one." Upon hearing this, Ivanka asked with hopeful anticipation, "Do you have a better method?" Martin said, "I actually do." December 22, 2017. Americans suddenly discovered that Trump, their president who loved voicing his opinions online, had suddenly vanished from the internet. It seemed overnight. All of Trump's accounts across the entire internet had disappeared. Subsequently, Twitter, Facebook, and several other social media websites all displayed banners at the top of their pages. December 22nd, Internet Without Trump Day. Twitter. In light of President Trump's continued posting of inflammatory language online that violates our website's guidelines, his account will be suspended for 1 day. Facebook. Hate speech and violence have no place on Facebook. We will restrict the president's account for 1 day as a warning. Blogger. We prohibit content that promotes hate, glorifies, incites, or encourages violence against groups or individuals. Accordingly, we will temporarily disable President Trump's account for 1 day. Snapchat. Our platform will shut down Trump's Snapchat account because we believe spreading and promoting hate incites violence. YouTube. Our platform strictly declares we will remove some of President Trump's inappropriate videos and suspend his account for 1 day. Twitch. Real-time streaming video platform. Twitch will shut down Mr. Trump's channel today. This action is to protect our community and prevent it from being used to incite further violence, a necessary procedure. This high-profile, anti-Trump action online successfully attracted public attention. The event was made so big that the heat around Russiagate was instantly suppressed. Subsequently, mainstream media also joined the noise, defining this event as the assassination of Trump. New York Times. On December 22, 2017, Trump was killed on the internet. Washington Post. This was an online action to assassinate Trump. Chicago Sun-Times. Trump disappeared. Even Google couldn't find his name. He was assassinated. This massive online action not only pulled Trump out of the Russiagate public opinion whirlpool through reverse psychology, but more importantly, it demonstrated the power of the internet. Washington. In a Democratic club, Obama and Clinton were chatting. Clinton. It's truly frightening. We seem to have consistently underestimated the power of the internet. Martin's social media layout seems to have started as early as 1998, right? Obama. Correct. My junior is an extremely far-sighted person. Clinton suddenly asked, those websites that blocked Trump's accounts yesterday, he should have investments in all of them, right? Does this count as monopolization? Obama shook his head. He only holds a portion of the shares, not controlling stakes. However, Martin is very good at dealing with people. His relationships with those big tech bosses in Silicon Valley seem to be very good. In fact, if Martin hadn't spoken up to reassure them, those tech bosses would have long wanted to deal with Trump's father-in-law, given his policies. In the eyes of the Silicon Valley big shots, Trump is a bad news. Why? Because some of Trump's public policies could bring bad news to the tech industry. For example, Trump wants to renegotiate trade agreements. The core of Trump's America First strategy is the revival of U.S. manufacturing. He once said, "I want to give our NAFTA partners a wake-up call. We intend to immediately renegotiate the terms of that agreement to get a better deal for our products and more jobs for our workers. If they don't agree to a renegotiation, the U.S. will withdraw from the agreement." Meg Whitman, the CEO of HP, who is also a Republican, once cursed about this very issue to a CNBC reporter. In an interview, Meg Whitman stated, "I believe Trump's policies regarding free trade are 180 degrees wrong and will bring adverse effects to the entire industry. U.S. manufacturing needs to become the most efficient and beneficial competitor. To compete with Huawei and Lenovo, we must have lower cost efficiency and benefits." Another example is Trump's controversial statements about Apple and Amazon. Trump once declared he wanted Apple to produce iPhones in the U.S. If that really happened, the skyrocketing costs would be unbearable for Apple. Previously, when Apple and the federal government were locked in a stalemate over whether the federal government had the authority to unlock an iPhone, Trump was very dissatisfied with Apple's stance and even called for a boycott of all Apple products. Trump also attacked Bezos, claiming he used his ownership of the Washington Post to influence policy for personal gain. Then there's the stubborn immigration policy. The U.S. H-1B visa is issued to foreign professionals working in specialty occupations in the U.S. Internet companies like Google and Facebook have long relied on H-1B visas to bring in foreign talent. However, Trump's attitude towards immigrants and the immigration policies being implemented will restrict these internet companies from hiring cheaper foreign employees. Furthermore, Trump opposes net neutrality. The FCC chairman appointed by Trump might repeal the net neutrality rules established by the FCC in 2015. These rules require internet service providers to treat all internet content equally without bias. These rules are considered the foundation of free speech. Compared to maintaining an unbiased neutral stance, Trump is more inclined to let media express their differing views on public issues. Repealing net neutrality could lead to higher internet costs. You'd need to pay extra money and effort to access different information. Therefore, when Martin called for everyone to block Trump's accounts for one day to demonstrate the power of the internet, the overwhelming response wasn't just due to Martin's prestige, but more because they had long wanted to do so. For a full day, being offline felt very strange to Trump. Although he's a man in his 60s, Trump was already accustomed to the internet's presence in his life. Suddenly losing it, he truly felt a bit lonely. Fortunately, the internet blackout lasted only one day. The next day, all of Trump's accounts were restored, and he couldn't wait to open his Twitter account and start posting. A controversial tweet appeared before the public once again. "I believe the U.S. should recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel." In fact, to win over pro-Israel American voters, Trump had promised during last year's presidential campaign that he would move the U.S. Embassy in Israel from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem after taking office. The status of Jerusalem is one of the most contentious topics in Israeli-Palestinian peace talks. Israel captured East Jerusalem after the 1967 Six-Day War and declared the entire Jerusalem as Israel's eternal, undivided capital. The Palestinians insist on demanding East Jerusalem as the capital of a future Palestinian state. The international community generally does not recognize Israeli sovereignty over Jerusalem. A U.S. law enacted in 1995 stipulates that the U.S. Embassy in Israel must be moved to Jerusalem. However, the law also gives the U.S. president the right to delay its implementation every 6 months for security reasons, requiring the signing of a related waiver. Historically, the U.S. government's policy has been that the status of Jerusalem should be resolved through Israeli-Palestinian negotiations. All U.S. presidents since 1995 have not moved the U.S. embassy to Jerusalem to avoid exacerbating conflicts. In fact, although Trump promised during the campaign to move the embassy to support efforts to restart peace talks, he signed the waiver delaying the move in June of this year. At that time, the Associated Press, AP, cited statements from some U.S. officials reporting that Trump still intended to fulfill his campaign promise but was worried it would hinder peace efforts. So he was considering not moving the embassy physically but recognizing Jerusalem as Israel's capital. However, recently, Trump's National Security Advisory Team has been discussing this issue, with discussions intensifying in recent days. Trump joined the discussion a few days ago, and his emotions grew increasingly agitated, speaking for a full hour about fulfilling his promise. During the meeting, Secretary of Defense James Mattis and Secretary of State Rex Tillerson pointed out that moving the embassy would pose serious security threats to U.S. diplomats and military personnel stationed in Islamic countries. King Abdullah II of Jordan also issued a similar warning to Vice President Mike Pence and Tillerson during his visit to the U.S. this week, stating that moving the embassy to Jerusalem without an Israeli-Palestinian peace agreement would deepen anti-U.S. sentiment in the Middle East, triggering chaos and instability. After intense discussion, Trump's core advisory team ultimately heeded this warning, but insisted on finding some way to show Trump was fulfilling his campaign promise to move the embassy. Thus, the meeting resulted in a plan to recognize Jerusalem as Israel's capital without physically moving the embassy. This is the reason behind Trump's tweet announcing the news. But even without physically moving the embassy, the U.S. president recognizing Jerusalem as Israel's capital has already provoked strong reactions from the Palestinians and the international community. Especially in the Middle East, there is widespread resentment. A spokesperson for Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas responded to Trump's tweet that night, stating, "Any Israeli-Palestinian peace plan must recognize East Jerusalem as the capital of Palestine." King Abdullah II of Jordan also believed that Trump is playing with fire like this. The Jerusalem issue is absolutely a powder keg. As the holy land for Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, the ownership of Jerusalem is not only the core of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict over decades, but also a major focal point for conflicts between Israeli and the Arab world, and even between Christian and Islamic civilizations. Back in 1948, according to a UN Security Council resolution, the Palestinian region was supposed to establish a Jewish state and an Arab Palestinian state, with Jerusalem under international administration, belonging neither to Israel nor to the Arab states. However, this plan was never implemented. Led by Egypt and Transjordan, a multinational Arab coalition crossed borders and launched the first Middle East war the day after Israel's founding, sending troops to occupy Jerusalem, but were ultimately counter-killed by the Israeli army. After Israel occupied approximately 23.5% of the land west of the Jordan River that originally belonged to Palestine, both sides defined a ceasefire line, known as the Green Line. For nearly 70 years since, wars between Israel and Middle Eastern Arab nations have been incessant. The Arab nations have been cowardly, never winning a single war. The West Bank, including Jerusalem, has been largely under Israeli de facto control. By 1980, having won many wars, Israel grew increasingly powerful and outright legislated Jerusalem as its eternal and undivided capital. However, under international community intervention, Israel also agreed, based on the 1949 Armistice Green Line, to grant Palestine temporary shared governance rights over Jerusalem. Thus, the Palestinian Authority also declared Jerusalem the capital of Palestine, specifically demanding the establishment of a Palestinian state based on the Green Line to determine the Israeli-Palestinian border, with East Jerusalem belonging to Palestine. However, Israeli-Palestinian conflicts have often started with wars, and wars have led to intensified contradictions. The two sides can be said to have no possibility of reconciliation anymore. Ceasefires are merely halftime breaks, with truth lying within artillery range. To this day, The ownership of Jerusalem has practically evolved into whoever snatches it gets it, whoever has the bigger fist gets it. Determining right and wrong in this issue is already a messy account that cannot be clarified. However, due to its stronger military power, Israel has acquired more Jerusalem land. But territories obtained through military occupation are considered illegal by the current international community. Therefore, although Israel occupies more than half of Jerusalem, it has not gained principled recognition. Previously, most countries, including the U.S., still believed that the ownership of Jerusalem should be resolved through bilateral negotiations between Israel and Palestine. Most countries' embassies in Israel were located in Tel Aviv. Clearly, everyone had been playing the neutral role quite well until now. So why did Trump choose to take sides? Of course, it was to gain the support of the Jewish lobby. Since taking office, Trump has had a rough time, facing various obstacles and stumbling blocks from both within and outside his party. According to continuously published U.S. media data, especially after the Russiagate incident, voices opposing him have been wave after wave, each higher than the last. To consolidate his governing foundation, Trump must cling more closely to the deeply rooted Jewish lobby in U.S. politics. His means of showing this is reflected in being more supportive of Israel internationally. Not just to win over the Jewish lobby, my father also wants to make Israel the U.S.'s watchdog in the Middle East, Ivanka said over the phone. I know. Unlike him and his think tank, the U.S. cannot let Iran fall into the hands of the radicals. Even if we can't overthrow the Assad regime and establish a pro-U.S. government, we need to keep Syria in long-term turmoil and war, trapping Iran in it and preventing it from extricating itself. Right. Martin said. In Martin's view, Israel's fierce military strength is undeniable. Having dominated the Middle East for decades with enemies rising one after another, yet never defeated, it indeed qualifies as a troublemaker. For Martin, he also hopes the Middle East remains chaotic. That way, his activities in West Africa won't attract attention. On the same day, U.S. President Trump announced the recognition of Jerusalem as Israel's capital and promised to move the U.S. Embassy in Israel to Jerusalem. The U.S. Department of State website issued a latest worldwide caution notice. The notice stated, due to terrorist attacks, political turmoil, and violent events frequently occurring without any warning, U.S. citizens are strongly advised to maintain high vigilance and take appropriate measures to enhance travel safety awareness. The notice added, U.S. government facilities worldwide are at a heightened state of alert. These facilities may temporarily close or periodically suspend public services to assess their security status. In such cases, U.S. embassies and consulates will make every effort to provide emergency services to U.S. citizens. U.S. citizens abroad should pay attention to local news and maintain contact with the nearest U.S. embassy or consulate. 3 days later, war broke out again in the Middle East. Near the Israeli town of Sderot, close to the Gaza border, multiple rockets were fired from Gaza. The Israeli parliament issued a red alert signal. An Israeli military representative declared to the media, Palestinian youths and the Israeli army are engaged in combat. Specific details are being understood. December 18th. Coinciding with the Muslim Jumu'ah, Friday prayers, hundreds of thousands of Muslims went to the Al-Aqsa Mosque in Jerusalem for worship every Friday. The Palestinian Islamic Resistance Movement, Hamas, had declared the 18th as a day of rage and called on the people to start a new, great uprising on this day. The Resistance Movement organization stated, unless Trump changes his mind, the war will continue indefinitely. According to BBC News on the 18th, in response to the tense situation, Israel had already deployed several hundred additional soldiers in the West Bank. Currently, the clashes have resulted in dozens of injuries. Martin kept an eye on the situation while editing films and controlling internal construction in Guinea. The war between Israel and Palestine might seem unrelated to Martin or Guinea, but he heard the U.S. is preparing to sell 16 F-16 fighter jets to Israel. Israel doesn't need that many. Surely there's no problem giving Guinea a few, right? We can pay more. Also recently, the Guinean domestic military underwent a major equipment upgrade, phasing out a batch of weapons, also American-style equipment. Perhaps they can be sold to Palestine or even the IS organization. The relocation plans for some industrial bases in Eastern Europe can also begin. Not only should those machinery and equipment be shipped to Guinea, but those workers can also be recruited. Time flies. In the blink of an eye, 2017 passed. The time came to February 2018. The annual Oscars arrived as scheduled. The process was uneventful. The 90th Academy Awards had a total of 24 award categories. Among them, the Myers Pictures investment The Shape of Water won Best Picture. Guillermo del Toro won Best Director for The Shape of Water. Gary Oldman won Best Actor for Darkest Hour. Frances McDormand won Best Actress for Three Billboards Outside Ebbing, Missouri. At this year's Oscars, giving women a voice was also a major theme. Best Actress winner Frances McDormand, while giving her acceptance speech, invited all female nominees to stand up, celebrating female power. On the same day, in West Africa, Guinea's nuclear power plant quietly and secretly broke ground. After absorbing scientific and technical talent from Iraq and Libya, Guinea's development in mathematics, physics, and chemistry progressed rapidly. The capital university also gradually began to show promise in these fields. A nuclear power plant isn't actually that complex. It's essentially about boiling water. Boiling water produces steam. Steam drives a turbine to rotate, which then drives a generator, thus producing a continuous supply of electricity. The difference from a coal-fired power plant lies in what is used to create the heat. A nuclear power plant uses the fission reactions within a nuclear reactor to generate massive amounts of thermal energy. This led to uranium-235. 1 kilogram of uranium-235, when fissioned, releases energy equivalent to 2,798 tons of standard coal, demonstrating the immense power of nuclear energy. Uranium-235 is also the material used to make atomic bombs. However, the uranium-235 used for atomic bombs and that used in nuclear reactors have different enrichment levels. Nuclear reactors use low-enriched uranium with an enrichment level of 2 to 4%, while atomic bombs use highly enriched, weapon-grade uranium with an enrichment level of 90% or above. They are called enriched uranium because in natural or the content of uranium-235 is only 0.7%. Therefore, to obtain higher concentrations of uranium-235, a uranium enrichment plant is needed to increase its concentration. Guinea does have uranium deposits. To date, a total of 14 uranium ore veins have been discovered within Guinea. In fact, since 1968, the Guinean government has sought assistance from foreign governments and companies to survey for uranium deposits. The first vein discovered in Guinea was in the Kalinko region, prefecture of Dingwere. The largest known vein is currently in the Boma region, prefecture of Kindia. Additionally, in the prefecture of Bela, Yomu region, southeast of Kruin in the Damaro region, in the prefecture of Mamu, the Mamu region, in the prefecture of Kindia, the Forcaraya region, and on the Los Islands near Conakry, uranium deposits are distributed. Sample analysis shows that the uranium ore in the Kindia region has a U308 content of 0.2%, 10 times the average content of Namibian uranium ore. Why did Martin previously choose Guinea, this West African poor country, as his base? Besides the country being poor and easy to control, it's also because Guinea is incredibly rich in mineral resources. Dubbed the geological miracle, it possesses the world's largest reserves of bauxite resources. Guinea's bauxite reserves are estimated at 40 to 41 billion tons, accounting for about 2/3 of the world's total reserves, of which the identified reserves are 29 billion tons, ranking first in the world. The world's top 4 bauxite resource countries are Guinea, Australia, Brazil. Guinea's iron ore reserves and grade are also among the world's best. The iron ore reserves are large, the grade is high, and it's easy to mine, with a significant portion being high grade or with grades as high as 56 to 72%. Guinea's iron ore reserves are as high as over 15 billion tons. Guinea's gold reserves are also very rich, widely distributed, estimated to exceed 1,000 tons. Gold panning indications are found throughout Guinea, divided into primary deposits, disseminated veins, stockwork veins, and quartz veins, and secondary deposits, alluvial placers, river plain alluvium. Guinea's diamond resources are estimated at 300 million carats, of which 70% are gem quality. The identified reserves are about 25 to 30 million carats, stored in riverbed alluvium and within or deposits. The average grade is 0.12 to 2 carats per cubic meter, with 45 to 60% suitable for jewelry and 25 to 40% usable as industrial diamonds. The offshore basins of Guinea contain large sedimentary rock layers. In 2008, Martin's Crude Oil Company entered Guinea to begin surveys. Optimistic estimates suggest the deepwater block could hold up to 3.7 billion barrels of crude oil reserves, with a risk-adjusted estimate of 400 million barrels. The shallow water area holds about 2.3 billion barrels, with a risk-adjusted estimate of 370 million barrels. Besides the above resources, Guinea also harbors large amounts of other rare metals and minerals. Nickel ore, reserves estimated at 73 million tons. Graphite, distributed in the regions of Kindia and Zubia, reserves estimated at 113 million tons. Limestone, reserves estimated at 40 million tons. Phosphate rock, distributed in the Bach region. Nitrate deposits, distributed in the Basse-Cité region. Talc deposits, distributed in the Kankan region. Cobalt ore, located in the suburbs of Conakry, on the Callum Peninsula. Chromite ore, a vein discovered in the Kakalima Mountains, Koya region. Copper, lead, zinc ore, distributed in the regions of Tlimal, Kindia, Koya, Lab, Mali, Dabola, and Dalaba. Placer gold deposits, 2 placer veins discovered in the Kakalima Mountains, Koya region. Lateritic nickel ore, in the regions of Kindia, Lab, Dabola, and Karusa. Guinea also has various colors and qualities of granite. On the Los Islands, there is syenite. In the Debrica area west of Basse-Cité, there are red, blue, emerald, etc. It can be said that Guinea, this country, has the conditions for developing heavy industry because most of the minerals needed for heavy industry can be found domestically, without worry of being strangled by external forces. Most perfectly, this geological miracle of Guinea was, in the original timeline, unveiled by the Ministry of Finance's website in 2009. When Martin first reached into Guinea, this country hadn't attracted much external attention. At most, a few gold mines were somewhat noteworthy. However, after the gold standard was abolished in 1933, although gold remained a strategic resource, it wasn't as highly regarded as before. Therefore, when Martin was infiltrating Guinea, the country was only slightly transparent. After Martin basically gained control of the country, Guinea's mineral resources became a state secret, absolutely not revealed to the outside world. Getting rich quietly is the true way. Although Guinea's nuclear power plant has just begun construction, in reality, the preliminary work for this nuclear power plant has long been underway. The refinement of uranium-235 is not that simple. Otherwise, why would most countries lack the capability to produce nuclear weapons, despite the principle being so straightforward? Let's understand the construction process of a nuclear power plant. First, uranium ore must be mined, then crushed into small pieces using a crusher and ground into fine sand in a grinding machine. Next, concentrated acid, alkaline solutions, or oxidizing agents are poured in. After a series of chemical reactions, a powder of uranium oxide with a concentration of 70% to 90% is obtained. The purpose of this step is to separate the uranium from the uranium ore. Then, the most difficult part comes. Everyone knows that uranium-235 is an isotope, accounting for only about 0.7% of natural uranium ore. Its sibling, uranium-238, makes up 99% of natural uranium. However, uranium-238 has no nuclear energy value. Therefore, to build a nuclear power plant or make nuclear weapons, these two siblings must first be separated. And this very step stumps 90% of the world's countries. Now, we need to chemically react the uranium oxide powder obtained from chemical decomposition with hydrogen fluoride to obtain uranium hexafluoride gas. Then it's the centrifuge's turn. This centrifuge isn't an ordinary one, but a specially made uranium enrichment centrifuge. This technology is key to nuclear fuel production, and most countries cannot manufacture it. Next, We inject the obtained gas into the uranium enrichment centrifuge. Under the high-speed rotation of the centrifuge, the heavier uranium-238 is thrown towards the tube wall, while the slightly lighter uranium-235 remains in the central area. The gas near the central axis is then extracted and transported to another centrifuge for further separation. How difficult is this work? Let's take Iran as an example. Due to limited centrifuge technology, in fact, Iran manufacturing its own uranium enrichment centrifuges is already a miracle. Iran used over 10,000 of its own centrifuges, spending 10 years, to refine 300 kilograms of enriched uranium with a 3% enrichment level. After the uranium-235 concentration is increased, it is sent to a special nuclear fuel manufacturing plant. After a series of processes, they are converted from gaseous form into solid uranium dioxide powder, which is then pressed into small fuel pellets and sintered into hard ceramic material. These are the uranium dioxide ceramic pellets. These pellets are typically cylinders 1 centimeter in diameter and 1 centimeter in height. Finally, hundreds of pellets are stacked and placed into a zirconium alloy tube about 4 meters long, forming a fuel rod. Fuel rods can be further assembled into fuel assemblies, each containing 90 or more fuel rods. A 1,000 megawatts pressurized water reactor requires about 27 tons of uranium annually, which is roughly 18 million fuel pellets and over 50,000 fuel rods. In comparison, a coal-fired power plant of similar scale would need over 2.5 million tons of coal to generate the same amount of electricity. And Martin started uranium-235 refinement work in Guinea 10 years ago. The preparatory work was completed long ago. Time came to August. Aquaman is about to be released. Promotion started early. 3 versions of the trailer have created a hot topic online. Just like in the original timeline, Martin created a brilliant underwater world, sparking immense interest among movie fans and generating widespread online discussion. For humanity, the deep sea and the universe are both unexplored, equally mysterious places. Aquaman's premiere was dazzling. What caught media attention was that Nicole Kidman, who played the Queen of Atlantis in the film, attended the premiere with her and Martin's son, Connor. The 8-year-old boy looked incredibly handsome. Is this Martin's son? So handsome. Used to see Martin taking his son out, carrying him, but later couldn't see him anymore. Heard Nicole didn't agree. Then why does she agree now? Probably grew up. Although young Connor isn't very old, it's clear he has received a good upbringing. He is comfortable and polite in social situations. During the interview, a reporter from the New England Journal, which has never been friendly with Martin, deliberately threw a malicious question at him. Connor, have you seen your father's film Get Out? Connor answered honestly, yes. What do you think about your father portraying a white family as evil serial killers? Nicole was furious upon hearing this and was about to intervene, but little Connor had already smiled and replied, okay, I know what you mean. You want me to say my father discriminates against white people? Oh, my father portrays white people as serial killers. That's terrible. Is that what you want to hear? Little Connor's expression became animated as he continued. If you say that, then it's not just my father who discriminates against white people. You know, until now, in all TV shows and movies about serial killers, that most of the serial killer is also white. TSK, TSK, TSK. Every serial killer is white. So it's not just my father, right? Look at what they film. I know, not all white people are serial killers, but all serial killers are white. This is discrimination. Connor paused, smiled at the reporter, and said, isn't it? Isn't this discrimination? The New England Journal reporter instinctively nodded, thinking the child had fallen into his trap. He had already thought of tomorrow's headline. Martin Meyer's son condemns his father for discriminating against white people. Moreover, the child's words also involved other directors. Perhaps the matter could be blown up. While he was dreaming, little Connor's words took a turn as he smiled and said, white people being serial killers, haha, that's really not a good thing, but it's not white people's fault. It's because only white people can be serial killers. Only white people can quietly, covertly, continuously commit 8 murders without getting caught. Other races can't do that. This isn't the director's fault, nor is it white people's fault. Do you think there aren't black people or people of other skin colors who want to be serial killers? Of course there are. I know no race, just like discrimination. At this point, Connor glanced at the reporter meaningfully. But they can't succeed. Can you imagine a black serial killer? He drives to the supermarket to buy things and gets pulled over by the police on the way. Police officer, what's wrong? Your taillight is out. It is on. Then officer feels threatened, requesting to open fire. Connor imitated the dialogue between a black person and the police, causing loud laughter in the interview area, especially from the black reporters, whose laughter carried a mocking tone towards the New England Journal reporter. Connor continued, Indian descent, Latino, Asian, none can be serial killers. Their families care too much about their children. Imagine an Indian descent, Latino, or Asian serial killer bringing a suitcase home. Ah, Grandma, you don't need to go through my things. Why is there a person in your suitcase? What are you doing? Ah, call a doctor, call the police. This person has fainted. No. Connor's spot-on imitation made the reporters laugh heartily again. Except for the New England Journal reporter. Nicole looked proudly at her son's straightforward speech. Connor Myers unconsciously exuded his innate charm. Not only did he leave the New England Journal reporter speechless, but he also attracted more people. Is Martin's son really only 8 years old? Judging by his speech, he doesn't seem like it. Wow, this little Connor not only inherited his father's good looks, but also his sense of humor and talent. He's really smart. Seems like another little genius. The next day, when Connor Myers' words appeared in newspapers and on TV, the kid instantly went viral. Explosively popular, gaining countless fans. That's for the future. Let's not dwell on it now. After Nicole took her son into the banquet hall, the Aquaman cast, Jason Momoa and his family, also arrived in full force. Our Mr. Aquaman even shared a deep kiss with his wife on the spot, sending the happiness index soaring. Later, Aquaman also performed a battle dance, stirring up a frenzy at the venue. Of course, the peak cheers at the venue were when Martin arrived with Amber Heard. A well-meaning reporter recounted to Martin how his son had just teased and mocked the New England Journal reporter. Martin laughed and said, "He's great, isn't he? That's my boy. By the way, where is that reporter?" Martin looked around, but didn't see any reporter with a New England Journal tag and asked. A black reporter laughed and said, "We were all booing him earlier. He couldn't take it and ran off." Well done. Martin gave a thumbs up. Aquaman's premiere was very successful. The story is just a simple one. During a storm, lighthouse keeper Thomas Curry, played by Temuera Morrison, rescues the injured Atlantean Queen Atlanta, played by Nicole Kidman. They fall in love and give birth to Arthur Curry, played by Jason Momoa, who is half human, half Atlantean blood. To save her lover and son, Atlanta chooses to leave. Years later, Atlanta is forced to return to the underwater kingdom to enter a political marriage, bearing a son, ORM, played by Patrick Wilson. After growing up, ORM becomes king and harbors deep hatred for surface humans, beginning to amass the military forces of the underwater nations to destroy the surface world. ORM's fiancée, Princess Mara of the underwater kingdom of Zeeble, played by Amber Heard, intends to stop this war. She goes to the surface to find Arthur Curry, asking him to return to Atlantis as Queen Atlanta's eldest son to reclaim the throne. Moreover, Mara wants to help Arthur Curry find the lost trident that can rule the seas. But isn't the DC Extended Universe supposed to be like this? Not all DCU films are Joker. The film's bright features, the fantastical underwater world, the Sahara Desert, Sicily, the trench tribe chase comedy, the hidden sea in the Earth's core, global ocean wonders, soaring to the skies and plunging into the earth, indescribably beautiful, made the attending movie. Fans exclaim that it was worth it. Then there's Aquaman's massive muscles and Mara's figure accentuated by her tight armor, which left both male and female fans thoroughly satisfied. It's imaginable that this film's DVD sales won't be poor. After its US release, Aquaman was released in Ching-Chong 2 weeks later. Its first-day box office was 153 million Chinese yuan, winning the single-day box office champion, excluding the 8.9 million midnight screening box office. On the second day, it earned 260 million Ching-Chong yuan. On the third day, it earned another 220 million Ching-Chong yuan, with a 3-day opening weekend total of 650 million Ching-Chong yuan. The film achieved 8 consecutive days of box office growth after release, with a total box office of 1 billion Ching yuan. After its North American premiere, reviews from overseas media were officially lifted on the same day, receiving considerable praise on Rotten Tomatoes and MTC websites. IGN even gave it a decent 7.5. The film received 55 reviews on Rotten Tomatoes, with 40 fresh and 15 rotten, averaging 6.3 out of 10. The audience watchability index was relatively high at 97%. Critical consensus wrote, Aquaman showcases CGI-produced superhero wonders and energetic action scenes while focusing on old-fashioned fun. On August 12th, after its release in 3,230 North American theaters, it earned $29 million at the box office, including Amazon Prime member previews and Thursday's Real D special. Screenings: Aquaman's early screenings totaled $33.7 million. Subsequently, the film officially opened in 4,123 North American theaters on the 13th, Friday, with a first-day box office, including early screenings, of $70.7 million. Its blockbuster momentum was undeniable, a hit from the start. IGN gave Aquaman a 7.5. Their review of the film was, Martin Myers releases a joy in the world of Aquaman that has a magical infectiousness. He made this film for two types of children. One is adults who still have a childlike heart, and the other is actual children over 10 years old. Aquaman is a typical popcorn movie with no dark elements. Although it doesn't match the previous style, it attracts more non-fan viewers. On the other hand, the film received 25 reviews on MTC, with 8 positive, 15 mixed, and 2 negative, averaging 53. The rap was positive. We Got This Covered gave 70. Vulture also gave 70. IndieWire gave 50. Slant Magazine gave the lowest score of 38. Let's look at the reviews. Variety. If you're willing to sit in a waterlogged world for 2 hours until the final credits, then this film isn't exactly rotten. Los Angeles Times. Inevitably, there are some clicked plot points and a large number of comedic-toned superhero fight scenes. Nevertheless, Aquaman is still an eye-catching underwater entertainment feast. Martin Myers has created an exquisitely beautiful underwater world for movie fans, with magnificent underwater wonders that can be called Underwater Avatar, Subaquatic Pandora. Chicago Tribune. Watching this film is like staring into a giant aquarium for 2 hours and 27 minutes, filled with various electronic sea creatures and actors pretending to swim with authority. Entertainment Weekly. Martin Myers conjures up an attractive world, but fills that world with comedic candy and foolish characters, including a hero who seems unsure whether to make us laugh or moved, ultimately achieving neither. The Hollywood Reporter. Ambitious in imagination, unrestricted by rules, it overturns the previous style of DC Extended Universe films. This is good. Like the underwater laser-crafted wonders, the DC film universe desperately needs this now. DC movie fans often say, DC movies prefer to tell stories steeped in darkness and human drama. Indeed, darkness has almost become a synonym for DC movies, not just the films, but the comic style is similar. DC's plots and storylines greatly favor narratives about human nature, creating a strong contrast with Marvel's comic style. The movie Deadpool 2 once cursed at Electro, a superhero under Marvel Comics, first appearing in Amazing Fantasy. Damn, you're so dark. Are you sure you're not from DC? This quip shows what the DC movie label represents. But Martin's Aquaman overturns DC's traditionally dark stylistic path and clearly has blockbuster potential. In the original timeline, it was the success of Aquaman 1 that prompted Warner to begin planning a shift in the DC film style. Later, Wonder Woman 2 had a much brighter tone. Although the script still explored human nature, Diana's lovable and lively character left viewers feeling refreshed, with little sense of a dark style. And Shazam directly countered Deadpool with its lighthearted, comedic hero style. This stylistic shift has both fans and critics. Some believe Aquaman represents the DC film's counterattack against Marvel, while others think Aquaman's style change will bury DC. However, regarding the future, as beneficiaries, Warner won't overthink it. In their view, if Aquaman succeeds, then DC has another money-making superhero. In fact, In DC comic history, although Aquaman Arthur Curry is a founding member of the Justice League and holds a high status in DC Comics, due to issues with his superpowers and character setup, he has always been criticized and has never been as popular as Superman, Batman, The Flash, or even Wonder Woman. As a consistent Martin booster, Kevin Thomas of the Los Angeles Times believes that Martin used his super-strong directorial skills and the magic wand of the film industry to accomplish a miracle that even Harry Potter might not achieve, making Aquaman the savior king within the DCU. Kevin Thomas believes Martin's trump card is balance. This balance is reflected in every aspect of the film, such as the balance between the magnificent, fantastical visuals and the fresh, relaxing tone, the balance between the heroic handsomeness of Aquaman and the stunning beauty of Mera, the balance between the epic, creative spectacle and the underdog rising in the film's narrative. And it is precisely this balance that creates the wonderful experience for viewers of having both a profound feeling and a romantic sensation while watching the film. Kevin Thomas also believes that Aquaman's film techniques represent the pinnacle of the Hollywood film industry. Aquaman's $170 million filming budget is only considered mid to upper range in today's era of flying blockbusters. But in terms of grand scene presentation and action design, it far surpasses many competitors of similar or even larger scale. In terms of visual effects, it can be said to be perfect. That brilliant and beautiful underwater world has driven countless people crazy. Kevin Thomas believes this is a manifestation of Martin's powerful imagination. Like James Cameron, Martin also possesses a beautiful imagination. When these imaginations, enhanced by special effects, boil over onto the screen, that dreamlike yet realistic expression provides viewers with a first-class experience. If watching the film just for thrilling elements, Aquaman can satisfy most viewers' needs. Regarding many critics' comments that Aquaman lacks depth in its story, Kevin Thomas snorts disdainfully. He believes that clear, easy-to-understand narratives should be a characteristic of comic book movies. In terms of the story's essence, Aquaman indeed did not choose themes like understanding darkness while believing in light, nor did it use heart-wrenching lines like, "I save today, you save the world." Its trump card is a simple, classic template. Frankly, Aquaman is a story about a prince reclaiming his throne through countless hardships. The storytelling and editing techniques make the protagonist's experience hierarchical within a linear narrative, allowing the character's own charm and memories to slightly overshadow the story itself. In Kevin Thomas's view, this might be a new idea and attempt. Although Aquaman's story is simple, it lacks some of Zack Snyder's pretentiousness. The excellent, overlapping comedic scenes successfully build the character's images and are enough to capture the audience's attention. From the perspective of explaining the origin story and attracting new fans, Aquaman's story, while not the most outstanding, is the most stable. The simple three-act structure of beginning, development, climax, and resolution, combined with the classic line in the film during the climax, "A hero is more than a king. A king fights only for his nation. You fight for everyone," is enough to make the vast majority of viewers emotionally stirred. In fact, the hot-blooded, slightly Chinibu style Martin bestowed upon Aquaman not only influenced DC's future plans, but also affected Marvel's Thor film series. Both are muscular men. Why does your Aquaman sell so well? Marvel's Thor 1 followed the traditional path of classic muscular heroes, a continuation of the 70s to 80s style. Movies like Conan the Barbarian, Kull the Conqueror, and Clash of the Titans, original, are also of this style, with tall, muscular protagonists who often strip to the waist to fight. But judging from Thor 1's box office performance, this style is now outdated. Today's audience doesn't like such purely tough guys with punch-for-punch fights. Dwayne Johnson's The Scorpion King and Vin Diesel's The Last Witch Hunter are also this style, and both flopped. This led these two Hardman representatives to later have to find new paths, combining muscles with other elements, like skyscraper climbing, Skyscraper, extreme sports, XXX, Return of Xander Cage, and finally just joining the racing genre, F9. The blockbuster success of Aquaman's hot-blooded, slightly Chinibu style showed Marvel the way. In fact, Marvel itself had already figured out something. From Thor 2, the style began shifting in this direction. But now seeing Aquaman's great success gives Marvel Studios immense confidence. They decided that Thor 3 would fully embrace the hot-blooded, slightly Chinibu style. The contrasting feeling of a muscular guy being naive. Marvel is going to film it for sure. The Republic of Liberia is a West African country bordering Guinea, also one of the least developed nations. The greatest aspiration of its educated elite is to emigrate to France and become Europeans. This country once experienced an extremely brutal African tyrant, Samuel Canyon Doe. Doe was born into a rural tribal family in Liberia's hinterland. The Kron people are Liberia's largest indigenous ethnic group, but remain a minority in terms of population. Like other native ethnic groups, they were historically ruled by Americo-Liberians. Americo-Liberians are blacks from the Americas who returned to Africa and established Liberia in 1847. The subsequent 20 presidents were also Americo-Liberians. These so-called Americo-Liberians were actually blacks expelled from the United States at the time. The U.S. was undergoing its Industrial Revolution, and the abolitionist movement was in full swing. After plantations were abolished, the lives of black people did not improve. Yes, they gained so-called freedom, but they couldn't make a living in the country. Nearly 200,000 blacks couldn't find suitable work, becoming unstable social elements. These forcibly idle blacks faced significant discrimination in U.S. society at the time. Whites called them the Black Plague or Black Bedbugs. Under these circumstances, tensions between blacks and whites escalated, and domestic public order in the U.S. was greatly affected. So, some proposed a solution: send these blacks back to their old home, Africa. Soon, this plan was approved, and most of these blacks were sent to the Liberia region. Interestingly, while these blacks lived unhappy lives at the bottom of society in the U.S., upon arriving in Liberia, they exhibited a strong sense of superiority, calling themselves Americo-Liberians. This group, once discriminated against, also brought racial discrimination to the African continent, looking down upon the local black people of Liberia. Simultaneously, they embraced the so-called freedom and human rights ideologies brainwashing from the U.S. Thus, in July 1847, the Liberian federal government declared independence, imitating the U.S. by issuing its own Declaration of Independence. From then on, the nation of Liberia was born. The groups sent from the U.S. prospered and gradually became prominent families there, holding the lifeline of the country. A scene that once played out in the U.S. was repeated here. However, the main characters changed to Americo-Liberian blacks and the local blacks. The former considered themselves of noble bloodline, while the latter continuously struggled for more rights. Conflicts between different forces accompanied Liberia's over 100-year history, the most famous regime change being the Rice Riots. On April 14, 1979, the Rice Riots occurred in Liberia. The opposition party protested against President William Richard Tolbert Jr.'s government raising rice prices by holding a demonstration in the capital, Monrovia. When authorities dispatched military police to suppress it, over 500 demonstrators were killed or injured. Subsequently, nationwide protests and strike movements followed. By March 1980, mass movements in Monrovia surged again. The unstable and turbulent situation provided an excellent opportunity for Doe's uprising. In the deep night of April 12, 1980, Doe led over 10 people dressed in National Guard uniforms and quietly infiltrated the Liberian presidential mansion. After a fierce shootout, Doe burst into the president's bedroom. Before President Tolbert could speak, Doe ended his life with a submachine gun. At dawn, Doe commanded the mutinous soldiers to occupy the presidential mansion and immediately announced the successful coup on the radio. The Americo-Liberians had ruled the country for over 100 years. No one could have imagined that a black native from a poor family with no background would ultimately seize power successfully with just a few dozen soldiers. After the coup, Doe was awarded the rank of general and established a People's Redemption Council, PRC, composed of himself and 14 other low-ranking officials, beginning his dictatorial rule. The early stage of this regime aimed to overthrow the old Liberian government and successively purge aides of former President Tolbert. Simultaneously, Doe also ordered the release of about 50 opposition party leaders, most of whom were imprisoned leaders of the opposition True Whig Party. Subsequently, Do arrested 91 former government officials, perhaps out of revenge for past discrimination he had suffered. After seizing power in Liberia, Do did not think about how to build the country better, but instead recklessly purged former government officials who had once discriminated against him. Within days, 11 members of Tolbert's former cabinet, including his brother Frank, were accused of crimes such as treason, rampant corruption, and severe human rights violations. Shortly after, Do suspended the Constitution and unilaterally established a committee to try the former government officials. Because the defendant's jury was secretly threatened and refused to appear, these officials were unanimously sentenced to death. Do's methods were brutally simple to the point of infuriating. His punishment of these officials was also extremely inhumane. According to reports, he ordered these officials to be stripped naked and tied to wooden stakes on the beach. The pitiful officials shivered in the sea breeze, some freezing to death alive. Such brutal acts of public execution were despised even in culturally and economically backward Africa and could be considered a regression for human society. This also shows that Do was not only uneducated but also had no concept of the rule of law, giving the impression of a newly rich perspective. This country is all mine. I can do whatever I want. Furthermore, Do's cruelty was also evident in his treatment of comrades who participated in the coup. These people were considered major contributors to Do's government. What awaited them was not high positions and generous salaries, but various unsubstantiated charges, truly explaining what, when the hares die, the dogs are boiled. Eventually, this group was either arrested or killed. Do's actions of burning the bridge after crossing the river and ingratitude were displayed to the fullest. This new ruler of Liberia seemed to hold immense malice towards everyone. Once, the chief editor of Liberia's National Television Information Department went to the presidential mansion for an interview. Coincidentally, Do was in a bad mood that day. Before the other could even ask a question, Do waved his hand and ordered people to take the chief editor away and beat him to death. After a series of purges, opposing forces within Liberia no longer posed a threat to him. The former dragon slayer had completely turned into an evil dragon that committed every atrocity. In 1985, Do announced he would hold a presidential election the following year. In January 1986, he was successfully elected president. With absolute power, Do began to plunder wealth blatantly for himself, countless civilians suffering greatly. Within 10 years, he had at least $200 million in savings overseas, not counting the savings of his family members, while Liberia's annual GDP was only about $850 million. It's no exaggeration to say that Liberia supported Do's entire family with the resources of a nation. As time passed, the Liberian people became increasingly dissatisfied with Do. During his 10-year rule, Do experienced 36 coups, large and small, and suppressed anyone he considered a political enemy. In 1990, his doomsday finally arrived. In December 1989, Do's former friend, former Deputy Minister of Information Charles Taylor, took up arms in rebellion. His forces advanced triumphantly, controlling over half of the towns. To prevent the Liberian conflict from spreading and harming neighboring countries, Nigeria, Ghana, Guinea, Sierra Leone, and Libya sent peacekeeping troops to mediate. On September 9, 1990, a soldier named Prince Johnson within the rebel forces led his troops to attack the capital Monrovia first. Do was captured. Prince Johnson had his subordinates torture him in the military camp. Johnson decided, strip him naked, just like he treated others before. Do sat naked on the ground, blood still dripping from his legs. The trial began. Johnson pointed majestically at Do and asked, Do, during your rule, you accepted bribes, broke the law, and slaughtered the innocent. Do you plead guilty? Do remained silent. He knew his fate. Speaking was useless. Johnson, seeing Do silent, flew into a rage. Fine, you won't speak. Someone cut off one of his fingers. With a scream, Do's left index finger was chopped off. Johnson began the interrogation again. Do still didn't speak. Another finger was chopped off. Chop, chop. All 10 of Do's fingers were severed. He passed out from pain multiple times. But Johnson did not spare him. He then ordered someone to cut off Do's ears. By now, Do was simply a bloodied man. Yet, he still didn't speak. Seeing him like this, Johnson became even more furious. Johnson resorted to his final move. He castrated Doe. The rebels placed the barely alive former president on a single bed, displaying him like an exhibit for all the people to visit. Thus, Doe was brutally tortured to death. The next day, Doe completely stopped breathing. Upon hearing the news, the Liberian people jumped for joy, celebrating that the tyrant had finally received his retribution. Doe's fall from glory took less than 10 years. Subsequently, his body was dismembered, and the flesh was divided and eaten by the Liberian people. The scene of his ears being cut off was recorded by cameras and broadcast worldwide. The video showed Prince Johnson watching all of this while drinking a bottle of Budweiser beer. After the death of the Liberian tyrant Doe, did the country's political scene return to purity? Clearly not. Liberia did not usher in peaceful development afterward. On this disaster-stricken land, different factions and forces fought for power and their own goals. A civil war lasting up to 7 years resulted in 150,000 deaths and 850,000 refugees, completely destroying Liberia's economy. The people's lives became even more miserable. In 1996, Liberia's GDP fell to $132 million. Charles Taylor, who had previously overthrown Doe, was forced to resign after 7 years as president. On October 1, 2003, United Nations peacekeeping troops took over Liberia, beginning to disarm the various armed factions in the civil war. On August 18, 2003, the interim government and all political parties and clubs signed the Accra Peace Agreement, and in mid-October, a national transitional government was formed. Charles J. Bryant was nominated as chairman of the National Transitional Government and was sworn in on October 14. On December 27, 2017, George Weah, representing the Coalition for Democratic Change, defeated the candidate from the Unity Party and incumbent Vice President Joseph Boakai, becoming Liberia's new president. Yes, you read that correctly. The current president of Liberia is the famous football star from back then. George Weah started his football career in Liberia at the age of 14. In 1987, Weah transferred to Cameroon's Tonnerre Yaoundé Football Club. In 1988, Weah entered the European League, joining France's Ligue 1 club AS Monaco, later playing for Paris Saint-Germain, AC Milan, Chelsea, Manchester City, and Marseille. In 2001, Weah transferred to Al Jazeera Club in the UAE. During his professional career, Weah won 2 Serie A titles, 1 League 1 championship, 1 English FA Cup, and in 1995, he swept both the Ballon d'Or and FIFA World Player of the Year individual honors. In 2003, Weah announced his retirement. In 2017, this football star became Liberia's 25th president. And in 2018, this very year, George Weah encountered major trouble. Perhaps humanity is indeed forgetful. The Liberian people who had violently overthrown the tyrant Doe, dissatisfied with their current impoverished lives, began brewing another riot. And their chosen leader was the former tyrant Doe's nephew, Matthew Doe. They eliminated one Doe, only to find another Doe. War broke out again. George Weah had a terrible headache and was utterly terrified. Having lived for many years in the civilized world of Europe, he had no fondness for the savagery and cruelty of this country, especially when that savagery could very well be directed at him. So he decided to seek help. He initially wanted to ask for assistance from Africa's hegemon, Egypt, but Egypt was too far away. Then he wanted to seek help from the West African power Mali, but Mali indicated they were still dealing with internal conflicts themselves and couldn't help him. Finally, he thought of Guinea, the West African small country that had developed extremely rapidly over the past decade. Liberia is asking us to send troops to help eliminate their internal rebellion? Martin looked surprised. Then his eyes lit up. Like Guinea once was, although Liberia is one of the world's least developed countries, its mineral resources are very rich. It has large reserves of iron ore, as well as abundant diamonds, gold, bauxite, copper, lead, manganese, zinc, nickel, barite, and sapphire resources. Moreover, the country is very suitable for cultivating rice and cassava. Before the Civil War broke out, it was once a rice exporting country. Granary plus abundant mineral resources equals must be taken over. September 12, 2018. Conakry Air Base, Guinea. Delta Wing. All-moving tailplane with 23 downward deflection, leading-edge slats with 12 deflection on the outer wing sections, auxiliary air intake ramps with splitter plates, variable sweep wing configuration. Parked on the runway was the fighter jet Guinea imported from the USA, the F-4 Phantom. Sitting in the wide bubble canopy cockpit, Colonel Lazrak lay in the ejection seat, carefully checking all the instruments. Colonel Lazrak was the pilot of this F-4 Phantom. This former Iraqi Air Force captain was now a Guinean Air Force major, commander of the 165th Fighter Squadron. Although the Phantom fighter jet was like the difference between a tractor and a Mercedes-Benz compared to the latest F-16, Colonel Lazrak was still very satisfied with his mount. At least it was much easier to handle than the Soviet-made MiG-29 he previously piloted. Soviet fighter aircraft avionics were considerably behind Western fighters, with many aspects requiring manual control by the pilot. And in air combat, a 1-second delay often meant the aircraft being destroyed and the pilot lost. During the Saddam era, Iraq was the premier air power in the Middle East, possessing hundreds of fighter jets, and even independently developed and equipped large airborne early warning and control (AW&C) aircraft and other special models. However, Iraq not purchasing American fighter jets had its reasons. At the time, Iraq was largely equipped with Soviet MiG-29s and Chinese-made F-7M fighters. Although American fighters had the best performance at the time, they were also the most complex structurally and had the highest maintenance costs. But that wasn't the main issue. Iraq wasn't short of money back then. The important thing was that the relatively harsh climatic environment of the Middle East, especially the massive sandstorms, was not friendly to such sophisticated American fighter jets. In 1998, the U.S. signed an agreement with Iraq to provide 36 F-16 fighter jets. In 2002, Iraq's Balad Air Base finally welcomed its first F-16 fighter. A total of 34 were supplied, with 2 lost during training in the U.S. The U.S. provided Iraq with F-16IQ fighter jets, based on the U.S. Air Force's F-16C divided by D Block 52, including 30 single-seat fighters and 4 two-seat combat trainer aircraft, forming the Iraqi Air Force's 9th Fighter Squadron. The F-16IQ inherited the advanced features of the F-16C divided by D Block 52, capable of mounting conformal fuel tanks above the wings. The two-seat version also had a raised spine structure to accommodate new avionics equipment, and the pilot was equipped with a joint helmet-mounted cueing system. However, the Americans tinkered with the aircraft, providing only a basic version. They stripped this batch of fighters of their beyond visual range, BVR, combat capability, preventing them from firing AIM-120 AMRAAM radar-guided air-to-air missiles. The air-to-air missiles provided to the Iraqi Air Force were the older AIM-9M, making their air combat capability even inferior to the Iraqi Air Force's previously equipped Soviet MiG-29s. In terms of air-to-ground attack capability, the U.S. mainly provided Iraq with -82 Malawian Quachas unguided bombs, with very limited supplies of air-to-surface missiles and laser-guided bombs. The U.S. move was clearly intended to prevent the Iraqi Air Force from posing a threat to their ally, Israel. But when the advanced American fighters entered Iraq, they couldn't adapt to the climate. Due to the annual sandstorm season, within a year, only 7 of the 34 fighter jets were airworthy, often requiring cannibalizing parts from other aircraft for maintenance. The F-4 Phantom fighter jet, though not as advanced as the F-16 Fighting Falcon, was absolutely a hegemon-level presence on the vast land of West Africa. Moreover, most areas in West Africa have a warm and humid climate, so there's no need to worry about the fighter jet's adaptability issues. As long as regular maintenance is performed properly, the severe attrition rate seen in Iraq wouldn't occur here under non-combat conditions. Colonel Lazrak quickly finished checking the instruments. The voice of the Weapons Systems Officer, WSO, in the rear seat also came through the headset. Check complete. The cockpit layout of the F-4 fighter jet is uniquely designed, using a tandem two-seat configuration. This allows the pilot and the WSO to operate independently, improving combat efficiency. After confirming the rear seat situation, Colonel Lazrak started the engines, released the brakes, gently pushed the throttle with his left hand, and taxied the aircraft onto the runway. Once aligned with the main runway, Colonel Lazrak checked all the instruments once more and, after confirming the rear seat status with the WSO, silently awaited the control tower's command. 3, 2, 1. 3 orange signal flares shot into the sky, releasing beautiful streaks of light. The 2 powerful J-79, GE-17 afterburning turbojet engines spewed pale purple flames. The afterburners were engaged, and the massive thrust of 79.6 knots *2 propelled this ugly phantom to accelerate down the runway. The powerful G-force pressed Colonel Lazrak firmly into his seat. The runway markings began to blur in his vision. Looking at the head-up display, the speed had already exceeded 300 kilometers per hour. Sufficient speed. Colonel Lazrak pulled the control stick back with his right hand. The next moment, all scenery retreated from his view. The fighter jet abruptly lifted off the ground, soaring straight into the sky. Under the fuselage and wings hung 2 gray external fuel tanks. Under the wings were 2 908 kilograms bombs, and at the wingtips were 2 Sidewinder missiles. Under the nose of the aircraft hung an M61 Vulcan 20mm rotary cannon. The mission this time was to bomb a rebel base in neighboring Liberia. For Colonel Lazrak, this was a simple task. In West Africa, apart from Guinea, there was virtually no air defense awareness. Matthew Doe and his troops were stationed in the Zorzor area. Zorzor is a town in northern Liberia, located about 80 kilometers south of Voinjama, with a population of approximately 5,000. Yes, you read that correctly. The population is 5,000. There is a gold mining center here, and this small town is a gathering point for gold prospectors. Nearby, there are also some nomadic tribes. Matthew Doe had an army of about 500 men. Don't underestimate the number. They were considered elite. Well, at least within Liberia, this force was elite. Tomorrow we can capture Salalah and Bakwe. In a week, we can attack Monrovia. A thin, middle-aged black man was shouting in front of a map. This was Matthew Doe. After pumping up his subordinates with adrenaline, Matthew Doe turned and asked his deputy, "When will the others arrive?" "Tonight, but they don't have weapons." "No problem. After we take Bakwe tomorrow, the military base there has enough weapons to arm them. By then, I want to recruit 10,000 people to fight for me." After taking off, Colonel Lazrak pushed the control stick slightly to the left. Simultaneously, he gently pressed the left rudder pedal. The fly-by-wire system transmitted moderate feedback. The aircraft rolled smoothly in the sky, banking left. If it were an older Model F-4 Phantom with a hydraulic control system, at low altitudes where air density is high and resistance is greater, more control force would be needed. In thinner air at high altitudes, less force is required. But this new model Phantom, equipped with advanced avionics, had been upgraded to a fly-by-wire system. Specifically, the control stick contains sensors that send commands to the aircraft via computers. With this control method, whether at high or low altitude, the pilot only needs to move the control stick accordingly. More complex operations are handled by the computer, significantly reducing the difficulty of use. The westerly wind was fierce. The over 300-kilometer distance was covered in an instant. The aircraft streaked across the border between Guinea and Liberia. Theoretically, after entering Liberian airspace, to avoid detection by enemy radar, the altitude should be lowered to below 80 meters. However, Liberia simply didn't have things like air defense radar, let alone expensive AW&C aircraft. So, Colonel Lazrak continued to operate the aircraft, flying arrogantly through the sky. The target was a small town called Zorzor. Most of Liberia's population is concentrated in coastal areas. The inland regions are mostly inhabited by nomadic tribes, with population centers only near a few important mines. Matthew Doe and his soldiers were stationed at the foot of a hill about 3 kilometers outside the small town. Liberia is rich in forests and arable land. After entering Liberian airspace, all Colonel Lazrak saw along the way were continuous forests. Flying at high speed for a long time while seeing only one type of scenery, similar to flying over deserts or oceans, can easily cause pilot illusions. A slight lapse in attention could lead to a crash. The way to overcome this is none other than repeated, rigorous training. Colonel Lazrak Lies was an elite pilot from the Iraqi Air Force, having participated in several combat missions against Kuwait and Iran, including air battles and bombing campaigns. One external fuel tank was empty. Colonel Lazrak Lies jettisoned it as they passed over a forested area. He immediately felt the aircraft become noticeably lighter. He glanced at the digital clock on the instrument panel. It was already 5 p.m., but the sun still hung high over the African continent, reluctant to set. However, Colonel Lazrak Lies felt that Africa was still more comfortable than his homeland, Iraq. At least here, there was more rainfall, which cooled the land a bit, unlike being stuck in an oven all day. The time reached 6 p.m. The sky darkened slightly. The sun still hung on the horizon, but the temperature across the land had cooled down a bit. Matthew Doe took his guards to a pond, preparing to take a dip and cool off. If it had been a few hours earlier, they wouldn't have dared to do this. At that time, the water in this shallow pond was about over 40 degrees Celsius. Jumping in would definitely not be a pleasant experience. But now it was much better. The water temperature had dropped to below 20 degrees, at least lower than the temperature outside the pond. "Sir, look, what is that?" Matthew Doe, splashing and playing in the water, suddenly heard the shouts of soldiers on the shore. He looked in the direction the soldier was pointing. A second later, a roaring sound rushed towards them. In the sky, an iron monster emitted a fierce roar, diving rapidly from above towards their military camp. Matthew Doe clearly saw two small black dots falling from under this iron monster, accurately landing inside his military camp. Then, a tremendous explosion sounded. Boom, boom. Damn it, it's an air raid. Matthew Doe had some knowledge and panicked, jumping out of the pond. Without even bothering to put on clothes, he ran in the opposite direction of the camp. Seeing their boss run, his dozen or so personal guards also followed. After completing the bombing run, Colonel Lazrak Lies was preparing to climb when the WSO's voice came through the headset, suggesting giving the camp 2 more missiles. "Lazrak, there are people at 12 o'clock to the left." Colonel Lazrak Lies turned to look. Just then, several of Matthew Doe's personal guards, in terror, were firing their AKs wildly at the sky. They are armed elements. Colonel Lazrak Lies pulled the control stick, and the nimble Phantom turned. The Vulcan cannon under the cockpit began to spew fire. The M61 Vulcan 20mm rotary cannon. This 20mm 6-barrel rotary cannon has a maximum rate of fire of 7,000 rounds per second. The kinetic energy of its rounds can easily tear through tank armor, let alone people. As the waterfall of bullets poured down, the fleeing soldiers on the ground turned into blossoming bursts of blood flowers. Matthew Doe just glanced back and was terrified by the scene of his personal guards exploding before his eyes. He had never seen such a horrifying scene in his life. Demon. It's a demon. 1 second later, bang. Matthew Doe turned into a shower of blood. The aircraft circled a few times at low altitude. After confirming there were no survivors, Colonel Lazrak Lies pulled the control stick, and the Phantom climbed. Then 2 more missiles were fired. After clearing the ammunition, Colonel Lazrak Lies piloted the lightened Phantom back to Guinea. "What, it's resolved? We only provided a location." George Weah looked astonished. "Sir, Guinea dispatched their air force." Matthew Doe and his entire personal guard were blown to pieces. A middle-aged black man in a suit said, "Confirm Matthew Doe is dead?" George Weah asked nervously. The body was blown to mincemeat, but our people found half a face at the scene and confirmed his identity from the gold tooth in the mouth." "Dead? That's good." George Weah breathed a sigh of relief. Then he pondered. "Air Force. Is Guinea's strength already this powerful? It seems those conditions are best met domestically in the U.S. Aquaman was advancing triumphantly at the box office. Trump was somewhat troubled. No, it should be said that since taking office, he has been troubled. Only the troubles have increased over the years. First, economic development did not meet expectations. Earlier this year, Trump solemnly listed 5 major policy priorities for 2018: economy and employment, infrastructure construction, immigration reform, foreign trade, and national security. In 2018, the U.S. economic growth rate was between 2.4% and 2.7%, better than 2016's 1.5% and 2017's 2.3%, but it did not reach Trump's promised 4%. However, this point didn't trouble Trump too much. In terms of infrastructure construction, at the beginning of the year, Trump called on Congress to provide at least $1.5 trillion in funding for government infrastructure projects and required state, local governments, and private enterprises to cooperate jointly, once and for all, making up for the U.S.'s infrastructure deficiencies. But, after a year, this target was only partially completed. By March 2018, the two parties had barely reached an agreement on a $200 billion infrastructure plan, still a long way to go. The immigration issue was actually one of the focal points of U.S. politics in 2018. The two parties repeatedly clashed over this issue, leading to two short-term shutdowns of non-essential federal departments. In domestic official documents, Trump reiterated using the legalization of young illegal immigrants in exchange for the Democratic Party's funding plan for the U.S.-Mexico border wall. The fact is, to this day, the above problems remain difficult to solve, and Trump, to force the Democrats to allocate $5 billion for the U.S.-Mexico border wall, did not hesitate to shut down the government again as pressure. Additionally, the highly controversial travel ban during the year, although upheld by a Supreme Court ruling. However, the Trump administration's severe crackdown on illegal immigrants led to the family separation phenomenon and the deployment of troops to the southern border to block the caravan of immigrants. All sparked domestic discussions in the U.S. about whether the country is still an immigrant nation. Some feel Trump is leading the U.S. towards isolation. Others feel that the proportion of the white population in the U.S. is gradually decreasing and there is no need to accept new immigrants. Then there's foreign trade. This was Trump's biggest bet this year and the policy that sparked the most debate. Throughout 2018, the U.S. could be said to have ignited tariff wars everywhere, essentially reflecting Trump and a few people around him's extremely stubborn win-lose trade view. Although this approach was opposed by most mainstream economists, Trump favored it, and, urged by Lighthizer and Navarro, it became a tool for the U.S. to protect its own economic interests. However, the result of the tariff war was that the U.S. not only failed to reduce the trade deficit, but also led to large-scale stock market fluctuations. The adverse effects of this trade protectionist policy are gradually emerging. In terms of diplomacy, the U.S. government under Trump's leadership continued to withdraw, highlighting his strongly nationalist-colored America First principle. Since the beginning of the year, the U.S. has withdrawn from international mechanisms and institutions including the Iran nuclear deal, the UN Human Rights Council, the Paris Climate Agreement, announced the start of withdrawal from the Universal Postal Union, and considered formally withdrawing from the previously signed Intermediate-Range Nuclear Forces Treaty. At the same time, Trump was also clamoring that if the U.S. doesn't get benefits, then next year it will also leave the International Monetary Fund, the World Trade Organization. But Trump's withdrawal behavior did not bring the U.S. more benefits. Instead, it cost the country international prestige. Russia quickly filled the void, and China also took the opportunity to actively engage internationally, gaining considerable goodwill. And this point also made the domestic calls to expand the scope of the Russiagate investigation increasingly loud. This is what troubles Trump the most. As 2018 drew to a close, the Russiagate scandal continued to ferment. The investigations by Special Counsel Mueller and several congressional committees were still ongoing, with the media watching intently. Would the Russiagate investigation lead to Trump's impeachment? This was something many Americans wanted to know. The New York Times opined, the Russiagate investigation shows no sign of ending. Parts of it have already evolved into a political tool for the struggle between the two U.S. parties, and it will continue to distract from Trump's governance. Unless there is currently unknown or unpublished judicial evidence, it is very difficult to see it leading to Trump's impeachment. Even if impeached, it would not succeed. For now, in the investigations led by multiple parties, anti-Trump figures placed high hopes on the progress of Mueller's probe. On one hand, Mueller's investigation had penetrated Trump's inner circle, snagging several people close to him. On the other hand, Mueller's investigation had clearly expanded beyond Russiagate itself, and the relevant time frame was no longer confined to the period of the 2016 election. The possibility of obtaining a smoking gun had increased. A few days prior, mainstream U.S. media had also reported that Trump himself might be questioned by Mueller's team. Mueller is definitely acting on the orders of the Clinton family. He and his team are like rabid dogs, trying to tear a piece of meat from my father, Ivanka said over the phone. Martin casually offered a few words of reassurance. In his memory, even worse things were about to happen. Sure enough, history had not changed. The U.S. 2018 midterm elections officially concluded on November 6th. 50 states and Washington, D.C. elected 35 Senate seats, 435 members of the House of Representatives, 36 state governors, and numerous state legislative seats. For the first time in 8 years, the Democratic Party regained majority control of the House of Representatives, while the Republicans maintained their majority advantage in the Senate. These midterm elections attracted attention across North America and even the world because their results would affect Trump's policy implementation and his 2020 re-election campaign. Firstly, the midterms would determine the majority party in Congress and some newly minted governors. If the ruling party could hold a majority in Congress, it would be conducive to implementing future economic and regulatory policies. If the other party seized the majority of congressional seats, the president's power would be significantly constrained. Secondly, the fierce competition between the two parties promoted their governing philosophies, boosting public favorability towards their respective parties in preparation for the next presidential election. In fact, the Republicans initially held the advantage, but the tables were turned at the last moment, reversed by the Democrats. Many within the Republican Party blamed this outcome on Trump. Actually, just before the elections began, Trump was only worried that some of his supporters might lack strong motivation to vote. He said, "I hope they don't take it for granted, stand by with their arms folded, and not vote," resulting in heavy losses because the other side is fighting with all their might in desperation, turning out to vote. Their strength is greater. But I think, because of our great success, I have a feeling we will do well in 18. I must say this, history is not on our side. Jim Ketch from the research organization Third Way said, "The president's party typically loses seats in midterm elections, and this year seems to follow that pattern. If Democrats turn out, they should be able to take many seats, but whether they can surpass the Republicans still depends somewhat on luck." Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell said this also posed a challenge for Republicans. He said, "My attitude is, we are helping the U.S. economy warm up, but the winter chill cannot be dispelled so quickly. If we cannot convey this to the American people, then we need to find other work." After the election results were announced, the New York Times published an analysis by Blue Gold think tank analyst John Hudak. Many voters, especially Trump critics, might view the midterm elections as a national referendum on Trump. If the Democrats win, it might signify a further decline in public support for Trump. He may not secure re-election. The Christmas season arrived. Aquaman's global box office broke $1.148 billion, with the North American box office exceeding $335.1 million, 29.2% of the total, and the overseas box office surpassing $813.42 million, 70.8% of the total. Most notably, Aquaman earned $290 million at the box office in Ching-Chong, a figure approaching the $330 million North American box office. The potential of the Ching-Chong box office was undeniable. Beyond North America and Ching-Chong, there were 21 other countries and regions where Aquaman's box office exceeded $5 million. A famous female film critic in Hollywood, especially on Christmas Day, posted a long review of Aquaman on Facebook. She wrote, "The success of Aquaman has proven that people still prefer a more down-to-earth superhero. Marvel films have done better in this regard, though DC is trying hard to catch up." The character Aquaman wasn't actually very popular in DC Comics. He first appeared in comics in 1941 and was one of the founders of the Justice League in the Silver Age, but his status was high while his popularity was low. Among the 7 founders, he seemed barely more present than the replaced Martian Manhunter. In the Super Friends animated series of a bygone era, Aquaman was quite popular among kids, standing shoulder to shoulder with Superman. But that was too long ago. Those kids are now too old to watch movies. Aquaman's lack of popularity, frankly, stems from issues with his powers, while DC kept adjusting them, changing from talking to sea creatures to controlling them, experimenting. With various personalities, it wasn't particularly successful. His position within the League is another weak point. His combat ability isn't on par with Superman's, his leadership not equal to Batman's, his personality not as fun as the Flash's or Green Lantern's. Cyborg at least can serve as a walking wiki and teleporter. Most importantly, he can't fly. Once stories escalate to a cosmic level, he becomes useless. Martin Meyer's film Aquaman primarily tells how Aquaman seeks his origins and matures through the process. Unlike many other superheroes, Aquaman is considered a half-breed among them. Therefore, his identity crisis often leads him to use a tough exterior to protect himself. Martin softened the harsher aspects of the comic book, Aquaman, giving this superhero a more grounded personality, adding some humor and comedic elements, a bit rough but also somewhat endearing, yet never lacking a righteous spirit. Furthermore, his character has some minor flaws. For instance, Aquaman shows no particular desire to win in his rivalry with his half-brother ORM for the throne. He loses several major battles and even flees the scene. These plot points reflect a slight inferiority complex within this superhero. If handled poorly by the director, such flaws could make the audience lose interest in the character. But Martin handled it excellently. The character's flaws do not detract from his distinctive qualities. The character consistently has his shining points. Also, Martin made significant changes to Aquaman's image in the film. This is a highly entertaining character. Long brown hair, strong muscles covered in tattoos, wearing leather pants, a full-on punk rocker vibe, the audience's imagination. And in the film, my favorite aspect is this. Even though this is a male-led blockbuster, all of Aquaman's actions are propelled by female characters. This is also a consistent feature of Martin films. The female characters always attract attention. Whether it's Pepper in Iron Man or the villain boss in Get Out, they all have distinct characteristics. Aquaman's success is inevitable. Superhero movies should, of course, bring joy to the audience, lead them on a fantastic journey, and also let people learn something from the characters. That's how it should be. The time had come to 2019. On January 30th, Aquaman concluded its global theatrical run. Its final North American box office was $342 million, and its global box office reached $1.287 billion. Meanwhile, Zack Snyder's Justice League premiered in early January. It still had a dark tone. Aquaman and Cyborg made appearances, while Wonder Woman, due to her immense popularity, held the C position on the poster. For Zack Snyder, he couldn't afford to lose this Justice League. Superman had failed, Batman v Superman had failed. Thankfully, Wonder Woman turned things around, but he didn't direct that. If Justice League failed again, he would truly have to leave this series. Martin attended the premiere and watched this 2.5-hour film. To be honest, he was somewhat disappointed. It felt worse than Batman v Superman. Zack Snyder could previously attribute box office failures to the dark style. While Justice League still had a dark tone, this darkness only seemed superficial, perhaps just in the visual style. Yet the characters were made overly cheerful. In the entire world-saving process, the Flash, as the comedic relief, chattering and being humorous was fine. The always serious old man Batman even cracked a cold joke. Superman even started acting naive. The superheroes in the film didn't seem particularly tense about the apocalyptic sense of crisis. Between major battles, one could consistently see the characters joking and interacting. For instance, during the final battle, Superman says to Batman, "I finally understand you brought me back not because you like me." Batman then replies with an embarrassed expression, "I don't not like you." The entire film seemed to become a stage for showcasing each superhero's abilities. The Flash's super speed, Wonder Woman's divine gauntlets and lasso, Aquaman's trident, Cyborg's hacking tech, Batman's monetary strength, Superman's omnipotence. By the time these superheroes finished showing off their unique skills, the villain Steppenwolf was pretty much done for. Zack Snyder doesn't seem very suited for directing ensemble cast films. It feels like all the characters are just skimming the surface, and the chapter narrative is too fast, giving me a feeling of watching a PPT, flipping slide by slide quickly, Sophia whispered, covering her mouth. Martin felt the same way. Zack Snyder didn't have the ability to vividly portray multiple distinctive characters within a 2-hour runtime. Perhaps given 3 or 4 hours, he could have expressed the film better, like the director's cut in the original timeline. But which theater would give you that kind of leeway? The runtime of one movie, the duration of 2 or 3 films. No cinema would let such a lengthy film occupy a screen long-term, and production companies wouldn't let a director be so self-indulgent. So, let's not talk about any so-called director's cut. The next day, the film received a 39% freshness rating on Rotten Tomatoes, a simple warning slap for Zack Snyder. Although the early box office wasn't terrible, he began to worry if the film's box office would lose momentum like Batman v Superman did. In fact, a 39% rating is utterly miserable for a superhero ensemble film. Judging from the comments below, Wonder Woman and The Flash received audience approval. The worst off were the big, bulky Bat and the guy with a bunch of money-made armor, Cyborg, who received a tidal wave of criticism. The terrible storytelling was also a reason the film wasn't well received by audiences. Actually, professional film critics didn't have a bad view of Justice League. CinemaScore gave it a B+, and film critics on Rotten Tomatoes gave it 85%. These results were still acceptable. Unfortunately, film critics don't represent audience word of mouth. All sorts of criticisms began to spread rampantly on new media channels. In the original timeline, Zack Snyder handed over the directorial reins midway due to family reasons, so the failure was somewhat explainable. But in this timeline, Zack Snyder was involved in the project from start to finish. Let's look at the mainstream media's evaluation of this film. Variety. This is one of the most visually captivating comic book films in history. The combat scenes won't make you feel tired. They'll give you a strong CGI feel because they, the Justice League members, are more like the 7 samurai brought together by a supreme belief, rather than because they are super invincible. Steppenwolf and his evil parademons are the main enemies, though he seems a bit weaker than in the comics. This time, he's portrayed as an emotional, towering giant covered in glowing lines, a humiliated assassin groveling for an indescribable object. Total film. Zack Snyder's Justice League is clumsy, self-indulgent, and impenetrable. New guests and continuous short musical cues hold little significance for DC fans. The overall narrative structure is dull and unchanging, still gathering DC heroes to stop the villain from destroying Earth by uniting 3 mother boxes. The minimal emotional expression feels more like an excuse for the pieces to move around the board. CNN. Simply put, no one loves depicting superhero action more than the director. He recreates the comic book feel of 30 asterisks transferred to the screen. The visual effects are dazzling and more heartfelt than the previous installments. Empire. As expected, this 2.5-hour, 7-chapter film isn't all effective. Firstly, the mother box narrative is unclear. If you're not a hardcore DC fan, prepare to be confused by multiple new plot points, especially concerning Darkseid and his subordinates. As for Cyborg, actor failed to unearth anything distinctive beyond his brute force. If you hope for an explanation of the costume changes within the story rather than it looks cool, this is what the 430 fans think the 430 wants, then good luck. If this is Snyder's final DC film, it's not a satisfying farewell. Entertainment Weekly. I keep saying it's a film, but I think it's more like a limited series with many episodes. Even compared to the glacial miracle that is the ice adventure, Zack Snyder's Justice League is a chore. At the end of the rainbow, the audience is promised that the real cool stuff will happen next time, but can we really expect a next time? The Hollywood Reporter. Justice League shows some specific improvements over Batman v Superman. Its plot and musical cues are more aligned, though sometimes still confusing. The visual effects show substantial improvement, although some parts remain very fake. Overall, the cinematography is better, even if viewers might find the nearly square aspect ratio jarring, as it was designed for IMAX, not widescreen TVs. The film's soul remains unimproved. Within 172 minutes, it hardly provides much fun, unbearably feeling like maintaining a single posture. The playlist. In many ways, This version of Justice League is still a bit messy, not a perfect work. Fortunately, there are fun characters providing many enjoyable moments, definitely worth the ticket price. On mainstream media, film critics somewhat save face for DC and Zack Snyder, with mixed reviews. But on the internet, it was a tidal wave of criticism. First, the good news. Justice League is far better than the gloomy Batman v Superman. Now, the bad news. Compared to the delightful Wonder Woman, this film is a disappointment. True, the film has many interesting characters with captivating superpowers, but the director failed to express them perfectly. Director Snyder seems to struggle with telling the stories of multiple protagonists within a standard film runtime. Martin Myers is a prime example of success here. This film's biggest problem: it lacks a truly powerful villain. Steppenwolf is too weak. Every time I see Batman and Wonder Woman cooperating with other DC superheroes, it brings a little light joy, but it instantly fades. Zack Snyder has made yet another clumsy superhero blockbuster. These heroic tales should be so thrilling, but he makes them so dull. Zack Snyder actually compromised. I came for his dark style, but what did I see? Forced jokes awkwardly inserted into intense action scenes. This style has appeared in the MCU, and Zack isn't skilled in it. Not only unfunny, but also making the film feel disjointed. It's just an unwilling concession and clumsy imitation. I'm a DC fan. If Wonder Woman and Aquaman gave me a glimmer of hope for DC film's progress, then Justice League, despite having a bit more cleverness and humanity, immediately plunged us back into the fear dominated by Batman v Superman. After the main script of Justice League ends, absolutely don't leave. There are two post-credit scenes. The first one is utterly terrible, and the lengthy cast list before the second one is still somewhat decent, but the audience is already exhausted. The biggest flaw of Justice League is that it's easily forgotten after watching, with basically no memorable scenes. There really isn't a single stunningly spectacular sequence. It's truly shameful considering the global box office golden age of recent superhero films. It wasn't just criticism. The film's box office also began to plummet, seemingly replaying the scenario of the previous Batman v Superman, Dawn of Justice. According to big data company predictions, the film's global box office might not exceed $670 million, while its investment was $300 million. It needed at least $800 million globally just to break even. Martin couldn't care less about Justice League's box office. Although Zack Snyder considered him a lifelong rival, Martin never saw him as one. He flew to Washington, preparing to help his father-in-law with a few things. Of course, the other party had to pay a price. As for what kind of help? Well, recently, mainstream media compiled a list of Trump's 2018 scandals, giving him a massive headache. The key was that the things the media criticized were true, and Trump couldn't even refute them. First Lady Melania Trump's expensive travels. Last October, First Lady Melania Trump conducted a one-day visit to Cairo, costing taxpayers over $95,000, drawing a tax. Her spokesperson was also a pig teammate, stating in front of the media that Trump didn't even stay overnight at the Semiramis Intercontinental Hotel in Cairo, only waiting in Cairo for 6 hours, giving critics more ammunition. Also, this First Lady's one-day visit to Toronto in 2017 also cost the government $174,000 for her hotel bills. Second, the Eric Trump Foundation lied about its spending issues. Since the previous year, an investigation into the spending of the Eric Trump Foundation has been ongoing. Forbes magazine reported in 2017 that Trump diverted donations for children's cancer research to the Trump family business. According to the investigation results in this report, Trump's third son, Eric Trump's foundation, raised $1.2 million in charitable funds, which actually flowed to the Trump Group. Experts indicated this behavior might violate federal tax laws and state laws. This report prompted the New York State Attorney General's office to launch a formal investigation, expected to trouble the young Eric Trump until the end of 2019. Third, President Trump's long stays at Mar-a-Lago, where club members constantly boast about their influence on the president. Since entering the White House, Trump has spent 78 days at his private club, Mar-a-Lago, in Florida. Reportedly, he goes there whenever he has free time, to the extent that some club members began boasting about their influence on the president. In August this year, ProPublica reported that the chairman of Marvel Entertainment and two other Mar-a-Lago members had been personally lobbying Trump on policies related to military veterans. These policies could affect millions of Americans across the U.S. This legendary club became more exclusive after Trump became president. Last year, membership fees doubled, reaching $200,000. Costs for couples attending events could be as high as $2,500. Bills for some gatherings held at Mar-a-Lago were directly sent to taxpayers. Fourth, the investigation into donations to Trump's inauguration committee is still ongoing. Multiple media outlets confirmed in mid-December last year that federal prosecutors were investigating potential misuse of funds by Trump's inauguration committee. The investigation, conducted by the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Southern District of New York, is looking into whether donors gave $107 million to Trump's inauguration. This record-breaking figure was more than double the funds for Barack Obama's inauguration committee, potentially used to secure positions in the Trump administration or gain specific political influence, possibly violating U.S. federal corruption laws. Some suspect this money might have come from Russia. Fifth, the Trump Foundation lawsuit financial scandal. The lawsuit against the president's personal charity, the Trump Foundation, is still ongoing in court. This nonprofit organization agreed to dissolve in mid-December due to allegations that Trump used the foundation for personal and political gain. New York Attorney General Barbara Underwood stated in the investigation that the charity was little more than a checkbook for payments from Mr. Trump or his businesses to nonprofits, regardless of their purpose or legality. Trump continues to denounce this lawsuit and defends his foundation, claiming it did great work and gave away lots of money. Sixth, foreign diplomats continue staying at Trump properties. Two ongoing federal lawsuits allege Trump violated the Constitution, as representatives lobbying for the Saudi government paid for approximately 500 nights at Trump's Washington hotel shortly after he won the 2016 election, during which he stayed at this hotel. The lawsuits claim Saudi spending of over $270,000 could constitute payments from a foreign government. The Washington Post published details about the hotel earlier this month. The report stated that a Saudi-supported lobbying group covered all travel expenses, including stays at Trump's hotel, for U.S. military veterans to lobby Congress against a piece of legislation targeting Saudi Arabia. Seventh, Scott Pruitt and Ryan Zinke resigned due to scandals. Trump administration cabinet members continued to depart in large numbers this year, with many officials leaving their posts under intense scrutiny due to investigations. Former EPA Administrator Scott Pruitt resigned in July last year amid dozens of federal investigations into his leadership at the agency, including allegations of misuse of funds and his cozy relationships with energy lobbyists. Pruitt played a key role in Trump's initial repeal of many major U.S. environmental regulations and the announcement of the U.S. withdrawal from the Paris Climate Agreement. Also, Interior Secretary Ryan Zinke, facing nearly 20 federal investigations, was forced to resign in December last year. He was accused of charging taxpayers for private charter flights and improperly riding a plane owned by an oil company. Zinke's connection to a Montana real estate deal also drew criticism and could lead to federal charges. Eighth, questionable investments by cabinet secretaries. The Trump cabinet is likely one of the wealthiest in modern political history. Many secretaries and assistants hold significant company stakes. Critics have been closely watching these companies for potential insider trading or risky investment withdrawals, but some still made questionable moves. For instance, Commerce Secretary Wilbur Ross was found to have ties to a Russian individual closely connected to Putin. Interior Secretary Ryan Zinke was involved in a real estate deal with the energy giant Halliburton, which contributed to his resignation this month. Also, the Education Department awarded a student loan collection contract to a company linked to Education Secretary Betsy DeVos. The recent media exposure had left Trump and his political circle bruised and battered. He sought out Martin to help rein in the media a bit. In fact, in the original timeline, this scandal compilation also involved Ivanka and her company. However, in this timeline, thanks to Martin reminders, Ivanka hadn't made those mistakes. In a private hotel meeting room, after the Secret Service checked the room for listening devices, Trump, Ivanka, and Martin entered. As soon as Trump entered the room, he shook his head and said, the mainstream media, have me spooked. It seems like they know every word I say. Now, I have to check for bugs every day when I get home. It's damn annoying. I've started having trouble sleeping. Perhaps the staff around you and those at home also need a check by the Secret Service. After all, it's easier to target them, Martin reminded. You make sense. I'll take care of it. Trump nodded, then changed the subject. So, Martin, I need you to help me. Deal with those damn media outlets again. Martin sat down, smiled, and nodded. That's not a problem. What can you offer, father-in-law? Trump suddenly said, Martin, why don't you join the Republican Party? I can be your sponsor. If you're willing, I might even give up my re-election bid and support you for the next presidential election. Martin's heart stirred slightly. Ivanka also said, Martin, I guarantee my father keeps his word, because his re-election is hopeless anyway. Trump glared at his daughter. Such an outgoing girl, blurting out everything. Martin was tempted. He was a demon, capable of manipulating hearts, but he needed close contact with people. Becoming president would help him build a vast network in the U.S. Perhaps he could set up a soul-snaring array in Washington. Of course, setting up a soul-snaring array in a bustling U.S. city was extremely difficult due to the many buildings. You can't just go around demolishing skyscrapers or residential complexes. Plus, the diverse population made it easy to detect anomalies. But Martin already had a rough plan in mind. It certainly wasn't easy, but it was worth a try. 3 days later, news that Hollywood magnate, U.S. energy tycoon Martin Myers had joined the Republican Party was published in the Washington Post. When Barack Obama heard the news, he specifically called Martin, half jokingly, half complaining, You little brat, if you wanted to join a political party, why not come to me? I could have been your sponsor to join the Democratic Party. Martin laughed heartily and brushed it off. He couldn't join the Democratic Party. Although he somewhat appreciated the Democratic Party's governing philosophy regarding the lower classes, his goal in running for U.S. president wasn't to build a better America, but merely to better fleece the sheep, and to acquire demonic power by influencing public emotions during the governance process. The Republican Party represented the elite. Once joined, he would become a fellow party member with most of the U.S.'s major industrialists, corporations, and financiers, allowing him easier access to these people. Then he could proceed with his plans. Time moved to February 2019. The 91st Academy Awards ceremony was scheduled for this month at the Dolby Theater in Hollywood, Los Angeles, California. This year's originally scheduled Oscars host, 39-year-old African-American comedian Kevin Hart, was asked by the Academy to apologize for homophobic comments and slurs he had repeatedly made on social media. However, this guy was also stubborn. He refused the Academy's request for him to apologize for his past homophobic remarks. Ultimately, the Oscars announced the termination of his hosting duties. Under immense public pressure, Hart finally apologized to the LGBTQ community in the statement announcing he would not host the Oscars. Subsequently, the Academy considered finding a replacement host. But after some deliberation, they decided not to have a host at all. This was the first time in 30 years, since the 61st Academy Awards in 1989, that there was no host. Reportedly, the ceremony would feature a group of A-list Hollywood stars to introduce each segment instead. According to tradition in recent years, all nominated Best Original Song entries were supposed to be performed live at the Oscars. But this year, the organizers hoped to keep the ceremony within 3 hours, so they decided to only retain performance slots for 2 of the original songs. Rumors suggested the Academy was inclined to give the slots to Lady Gaga performing Shallow from A Star Is Born, and to Kendrick Lamar and SZA performing All the Stars from Black Panther. Once the news about cutting the original song performance time broke, it immediately caused dissatisfaction and protests from industry insiders and the producers of the nominated songs. According to Variety, the Motion Picture Association had not finalized the list of performances. On February 13th, over 40 renowned directors and cinematographers, including Spike Lee, Quentin Tarantino, Damien Chazelle, Martin Scorsese, and Roger Deakins, signed an open letter urgently appealing to the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences to reverse its decision to present 4 awards: Best Cinematography, Best Live Action Short Film, Best Film Editing, and Best Makeup and Hairstyling. During commercial breaks, on February 14th, the Academy announced it was reversing the decision. The awards for Best Cinematography, Best Film Editing, Best Makeup and Hairstyling, and Best Live-Action Short Film would all be presented live during the broadcast. The Academy confirmed the news, stating all awards would revert to the traditional presentation method, without real-time editing and not during commercial breaks. On February 24th, the Oscars began. Looking at the list of winners, it was an awards ceremony that was neither particularly artistic nor commercial. In summary, the chaos in the film industry and business forced it to make changes, but this 91-year-old stubborn entity didn't really want to change internally. Over 91 years, the Oscars' aesthetic and value systems haven't kept pace very well, to the extent that the most radically black film, Black Klansman, could only run as a runner-up, while the chosen one was not white enough, but also not black enough, Green Book. The disparity between Black Klansman and Green Book was just like the aura revealed by this year's entire Oscar selection process. Thinking it's being very diverse, but the rules haven't changed, trying to respond to the pulse of the times, but the conservative spirit is very stubborn. After the Oscars, Martin immediately went to Guinea and then entered Liberia to take over the several mineral resource concessions promised by WIA. Liberia's iron ore reserves are 4 to 6.5 billion tons, with an iron content of 30% to 67%, making it the second largest iron ore producer and exporter in Africa. Liberia's iron formation dates back to the Archean, over 3 billion years ago. High and medium-grade deposits were formed by tropical weathering and rainwater, leading to silicate leaching and oxidation, ultimately enriching the iron. Weathering transformed banded iron formations into iron ore and can also form hydrous iron oxides, such as polycyclic iron ore. After helping WIA's government deal with the rebel forces, the other party reciprocated by granting Myers Group's mining subsidiary 50% equity in the iron ore mines at Mount Nimba, the Benue River, and Mount Bateau. This time, Martin brought a team of managers and surveyors to inspect his assets. The first stop was Mount Nimba. Mount Nimba isn't just a single mountain, but an area covering 130 kilometers, a nature reserve with tropical rainforest, mesophilic vegetation, and tropical savanna ecosystems. This area is home to rare animals like the chimpanzee, pygmy hippopotamus, and unique viviparous toads. It lies between Guinea and Liberia, with more than half located in Guinea. Its core area covers 21,780 acres, the buffer zone 35,140 acres, and the transition zone 88,280 acres. The mountain range runs southwest to northeast. Its highest peak, Mount Nimba, stands 1,752 meters above sea level. The southern foothills are lowland tropical rainforest. The northern side is tropical savanna. Rivers originating from the mountains, like the Nuon and Kavala, form part of the Liberia-Cote d'Ivoire border. Coincidentally, the section rich in iron ore happens to lie within Liberian territory. When they arrived at the simply built residential area, Martin was surprised to see the incumbent Liberian president, WIA, also there. He had come specifically to meet Martin, for no other reason than to secure more investment from Martin. WIA had no choice. After 14 years of civil war, the economy of this already poor country was completely devastated. Over a decade of civil war had long exhausted intertribal trust, and the massive Ebola outbreak inflicted unbearable wounds on Liberia. According to World Bank statistics, Liberia's GDP per capita last year was a mere $621, making it one of the least developed countries in the world. Extreme poverty led to dire living conditions in Liberia, while unstable conditions created social security problems, severely impacting people's sense of well-being. As of 2019, Liberia's poverty rate was as high as 63.8%. The illiteracy rate reached 58%. The infant mortality rate was 53 per thousand. The maternal mortality rate was a staggering 7.3 per thousand, and the HIV infection rate was 1.3%. The figures were shocking. According to the UN Development Programme's 2018 Human Development Index, Liberia ranked 176th out of 189 countries, a typical failed state. Although he went abroad to play football in his youth, Weah still felt loyalty and a sense of responsibility towards his birthplace. He wanted to build this country up. This want naturally gave rise to desire, and with desire, Martin found it easy to operate. Weah left with a smiling face, utterly unaware that something extra had been planted in his mind. After joining the Republican Party, Trump took Martin to several meetings, where he got to know many party bigwigs and elite figures. Time moved to 2019. A major pandemic swept the globe. Initially, the U.S. government didn't take it seriously. Trump even shamelessly boasted, "The pandemic is having an effect on people of Asian descent." Before his words had faded, the pandemic began spreading in the USA. By January 22, 2020, Trump attempted to downplay the danger of the novel coronavirus, telling the public, "We have it totally under control. It's going to be just fine." On January 24th, Trump reiterated his stance, calling the outbreak controllable. He stated on social media, "The pandemic prevention work is going very smoothly." On January 28th, Trump's advisor Robert O'Brien issued a warning. The coronavirus pandemic cannot be taken lightly. It is not only the biggest national security threat the U.S. is about to face, but also the biggest challenge of Trump's term. On February 6th, the first American died from the pandemic infection. Throughout February, Trump continued to choose to downplay the pandemic. He indicated at a pandemic briefing that this disease would completely disappear in 4 months. By February 9, 2020, the U.S. was still in the grip of the pandemic. The 92nd Academy Awards were still held as scheduled. Celebrities attended the grand event wearing masks. On February 25th, Trump indicated that the U.S. was close to developing a vaccine. Subsequently, White House staff hastily clarified that Trump was referring to the Ebola vaccine, not the coronavirus vaccine. Bafflingly, the Ebola vaccine had already been approved in the U.S. On February 26th, Trump compared the coronavirus to the flu and again indicated it would soon disappear. Informed sources revealed that in private, Trump explicitly told reporters the coronavirus was more deadly than the strenuous flu. In March, the novel coronavirus pandemic spread rapidly in the U.S. Globally, the mortality rate rose to 3.4%. Trump said in an interview, "I think the 3.4% number is wrong. I've spoken to many diagnosed patients. Many have very mild symptoms. They get better quickly. Some don't even need to see a doctor." Furthermore, Trump repeatedly praised his anti-pandemic policies. He told Americans the pandemic would disappear soon. However, his words and some of his actions were completely inconsistent. On March 13th, Trump declared the novel coronavirus outbreak a national emergency. The same day, Trump indicated that the U.S. CDC's production speed of test kits was much slower than that of other countries. On March 18th, Trump signed a pandemic relief bill, which included provisions for free virus testing and paid sick leave. By the end of March, over 1/3 of the global population was under lockdown. Trump sought to overturn his previous statements, claiming he had been taking the pandemic seriously for months. In April, Trump led the way in refusing to wear a mask, contradicting guidelines issued by the U.S. CDC. Trump stated, "I feel wearing a mask when meeting presidents, prime ministers, kings, queens is very inappropriate." Meanwhile, the pandemic continued to spread. 4.4 million people filed for unemployment, with the total number of unemployed reaching approximately 26 million. U.S. deaths surpassed 50,000. In mid-April, Trump made his infamous disinfectant remarks. He suggested that injecting disinfectant could kill the virus in a minute. Health officials everywhere urgently issued warnings, urging Americans not to listen to this off-the-cuff idea, stating that injecting bleach or other disinfectants was dangerous and could not treat the novel coronavirus. Martin was very curious. "Is my future father-in-law crazy? Is your father crazy? His recent actions are incomprehensible to me," Martin said to Ivanka over the phone. Ivanka said with a bitter laugh, "Haha, my father isn't crazy, all right? Well, he's almost driven crazy by the Russiagate investigation. He just wants to use these shocking and vulgar statements to divert public attention." Martin thought to himself, "I'm afraid there's also an element of playing dumb. If Russiagate finally blows up, he can blame it on being a fool doing stupid things." In the original timeline, after Trump was impeached, he said something like this: "I just did some stupid things. That wasn't my intention. I was deceived." June 5, 2020. Amid the prolonged pandemic and surging protest waves in the U.S., Trump posted 200 tweets in a single day, 37 of which were original. The rest were shares and retweets. Averaging one tweet every 7 minutes and 12 seconds, this, 413, broke his previous single-day record of 142 tweets. He also broke the record for most tweets in a single hour, 79. Around 1 a.m. on June 5th, Trump posted his first tweet of the day, congratulating a U.S. hostage released from Iran. Afterwards, Trump began a frenzy of tweeting, including tagging over a dozen Republican senators. After 8 a.m., Trump started his crazy rainbow farts. First, he tweeted praise for Idaho Governor Brad Little for pushing the state into Phase 3 of reopening after the pandemic. "Great job, Brad," Trump tweeted. Minutes later, Trump praised Senator Mike Crapo's healthcare advantage bill. At 8:30 a.m., Trump posted the May employment report, which showed the U.S. unemployment rate was 13.3%. Trump wrote, "Great job, President Trump." That's right, I'm praising myself. At noon, Trump posted a poll on Twitter claiming his support rate among black voters was 40%. After lunch, Trump attacked Washington Mayor Muriel Bowser as incompetent. Not long before, Bowser had allowed the phrase "Black Lives Matter" to be painted in huge yellow letters on 16th Street, just a block from the White House. 2 hours later, Trump called himself a big fan of NFL player Brees, but then criticized Brees for kneeling during the national anthem, warning, "You cannot kneel when you're under our flag." Next, an angry Trump attacked Bowser again, calling her totally incompetent, and she is a weak, useless person. At 10 p.m., Trump posted a video on Twitter. In the video, a right-wing figure claimed that Floyd, who was killed by violent law enforcement, is no hero, and it makes me sick that he's being held up as a martyr. Minutes later, Trump shared a video related to Democratic presidential candidate Biden stumbling, but the video had previously been verified as fake. Trump's final tweet of the day was promoting a book by one of his black supporters. This supporter was under scrutiny for allegedly running a nonprofit organization with suspicious cash gifts. However, since Trump signed the executive order targeting social media on May 28, Twitter, in a counter-move, had labeled several of Trump's tweets with "glorifies violence" and misleading information tags. The war between the U.S. president and social media thus erupted. On June 3rd, the Trump campaign released a new promotional video. This public service advertisement expressed condolences for Floyd while also strongly urging social unity. Bafflingly, this rare positive ad was removed by Twitter the very next day, citing copyright issues related to the materials used. The Trump campaign responded fiercely to this incident, directly naming and condemning Twitter founder Jack Dorsey for intentionally restricting the president's news distribution. Ivanka called Martin again. "Honey, is this really necessary?" Martin said, "I told you before, there are people behind Russiagate pushing it. Your father needs to suppress the attention on it by creating even bigger news. Clashing with social media isn't a bad choice. We tried it before, the effect wasn't bad, and besides." Martin paused before continuing. "Besides, social media is controllable. They are all my companies." The next day, "It's ridiculous, illegal, and of course very unfair." Trump once again directed his anger at Twitter, this time because of their trending topics. "Look at Twitter's so-called trending list. It's really disgusting. There are so many trending topics about me, but not a single good one. They'll dig up anything they can find, try their best to twist it, then make it trend, trying to turn it into a hot search," Trump criticized. "It's ridiculous, illegal, and of course very unfair." Twitter officials were quick to issue a statement refuting this. "Trending is very fair. Whoever has high views can trend. Our Mr. President is here complaining. Perhaps he should think carefully about why his bizarre behaviors get pushed to the trending list. He should rein it in a bit." Mainstream U.S. media also joined in. The Hill reported, "In recent months, Trump's relationship with Twitter has become increasingly contentious." In May, Twitter for the first time ever labeled a Trump tweet with a fact-check tag. Followers the tweet could contain misleading information. Subsequently, Trump repeatedly posted counterattacks, criticizing Twitter for interfering in the 2020 November election. The Washington Post stated, "The president really should reflect on his behavior. He is no longer the businessman he was before, but represents the image of the USA. He is almost becoming a laughingstock, and the USA is about to become a joke with him." The New York Times issued a statement. "It's truly laughable that Trump thinks Twitter is specifically targeting the election. He must remember that he previously relied on speaking out on platforms like Twitter and Facebook to counter Hillary in the court of public opinion." Trump continued to speak out. As a frequent Twitter user who often governs by tweet, Trump expressed in an interview on Friday that he often regrets tweeting too quickly. On July 2nd, during an interview with famous sports blogger Dave Portnoy, Trump stated that he is often criticized for using his Twitter account. He gave an example, saying that if you write a letter poorly, you can still put it on the desk and not send it out. "But we don't do that on Twitter, we immediately push it out. It feels great when you send it, but then you start receiving criticism. Most of the time I really enjoy using Twitter." Trump felt that in a world filled with fake news, having a platform to convey the truth with a loud enough voice was extremely important. Trump also indicated that he found the trouble usually came not from his own original content, but from his retweets. "You just see something and think it's not bad, but you don't delve into investigating what it really is, and most of the time you don't feel it's necessary to investigate. Then I find that often it's this kind of post that brings me trouble." The dispute between Trump and Twitter did divert a portion of the public's attention away from Russiagate. But in mid-August, what was coming still came. Trump was impeached. This was the third time the House of Representatives had passed an impeachment resolution against a president, following former Presidents Johnson and Clinton, making him the third president to be impeached. The reasons the House of Representatives brought Trump to the impeachment stage were abuse of power and obstruction of Congress. The House Democrats' impeachment managers submitted the articles of impeachment and a summary of the case to the Senate on the same day, asserting that the president's actions were the worst nightmare of the drafters of the U.S. Constitution. The Senate comprised 100 seats, 53 Republicans and 47 held by Democrats, and 2 independent senators. This meant that while the House could easily pass the impeachment articles against Trump, it was almost impossible to pass them in the Senate. As a Republican senator stated, Trump could become the first U.S. president in history to be wrongly impeached and then return to the presidency. One U.S. CNN commentator called it, "This is the darkest day in America." The president's legal team responded to the House's impeachment articles on the first day, asserting that the articles were a dangerous attack on the American people's free choice of president. In August 2019, a whistleblower alleged that during a July phone call with the Ukrainian president, Trump attempted to seek help from Ukraine to smear his political opponent. U.S. media reported that at least a week before the call with the Ukrainian president, Trump told White House officials to withhold nearly $400 million in military aid to Ukraine. After the incident came to light, Trump claimed this move was due to concerns that U.S. aid to Ukraine exceeded that of European countries. However, the impeachment investigators believe this action involved using the power of the office to pressure Ukraine, influencing the 2020 election, and that withholding military aid could harm national security, which Trump attempted to conceal. On August 19th, the chairman of the U.S. House Oversight Committee, Elijah Cummings, threatened that if the White House did not hand over all documents related to Russiagate and the Ukraine threat case, a subpoena would be issued to the White House. Some said that to further the impeachment investigation against President Trump, the White House was required to hand over all relevant case documents within about 4 days. Otherwise, a subpoena would be issued around the 4th day. On August 21st, the U.S. Politico website reported that Trump considered the White House leaker a spy, directly naming and attacking the related reporter. According to revelations by an anonymous former White House official, Trump wanted every White House staffer to take a lie detector test to find out who was leaking secrets to the media. Some White House staff even proactively requested lie detector tests to prove their innocence. However, early in Trump's term, his former special ethics counsel, Stephen Passantino, had previously investigated whether it was legal to administer lie detector tests to White House staff and concluded it was not permissible. Subsequently, the U.S. House Intelligence Committee issued a subpoena to U.S. Energy Secretary Rick Perry, demanding he produce documents related to the phone call event between U.S. President Trump and Ukrainian President Zelensky to cooperate with the House's impeachment investigation against Trump. The subpoena was issued after discussions by the House Intelligence Committee, Foreign Affairs Committee, and Oversight and Reform Committee, requiring Perry to produce relevant documents by August 29. According to media reports, the call between Trump and Zelensky occurred on July 25, initiated by Perry. Democrats also wanted Perry to explain media reports that he had pressured Ukraine to adjust the membership of an advisory committee for a state-owned energy company. 3 days later, Trump announced that Energy Secretary Rick Perry would leave his current position by the end of the year. Trump said he had found a new candidate for the position and would announce it soon. As one of the key figures in the phone call incident, Perry was a target for Trump's enemies. Trump had previously told the media that he only spoke with Ukrainian President Zelensky at Perry's request. Perry also stated that he had repeatedly requested Trump to speak with Zelensky, but the content merely involved energy cooperation and had nothing to do with the Democratic presidential candidate, Biden. Clearly, Trump was making Perry the fall guy. The impeachment case was arguably the biggest crisis Trump had faced since taking office. Trump was somewhat panicked, but then again, he wasn't. His rogue instincts kicked in. He publicly raged at his subordinates in the Oval Office. I know there are some of them among you. I don't care. Now, I want these words to reach their ears. If I'm impeached and removed, I'm taking them down with me. You should know I'm not joking. I'm capable of anything. That night, Ivanka spoke with Martin on the phone. Tell to your dad not to worry. He won't be removed. This is just a warning. The Senate is Republican territory. Even if they don't like your father, they won't let him be removed so disgracefully. Besides, issues like the Ukraine phone call and Russiagate lack real evidence. Martin vowed solemnly. Are you sure? Trump's voice came from the other end of the phone. Clearly, he had been listening nearby. Martin, already aware, laughed upon hearing this. I wouldn't lie to you. Right? Since you've adopted a tough stance, you must see it through to the end. Absolutely do not cut off contact with Ukraine to avoid being seen as having a guilty conscience. Also, if the other side strongly demands you publish materials, just publish them. You can release some unimportant stuff, mainly to give the public an explanation. I'll have the media cooperate on my end. Haha, that's fantastic. Trump smiled. 2 days later, Trump told the media, I would gladly invite Ukrainian President Zelensky to visit the White House. I believe he will accept my invitation. Then you will all know that this is all slander against me. I never pressured Ukraine during the conversation. The Democrats' impeachment investigation against me is political persecution. Zelensky will come and testify for me. A few days later, Zelensky actually spoke up. While attending the UN General Assembly, he told U.S. media, I never thought I'd be involved in the U.S. election. No one pressured me. Ukraine is an independent country. Trump is a good guy. Later, Trump indicated he would release the records of several conversations with Ukrainian President Zelensky on Wednesday. These conversations took place in June of the previous year, before the key conversation that triggered the presidential impeachment investigation. I am innocent. The truth will prove everything. Trump vowed solemnly. The end.